and I work at the University of West Georgia. I'm the Dean of the Honors College there, and I'm here today to talk to you all about debate, and specifically how to make you a better debater when it comes to speaker points. And within that, there's going to be a theoretical subsection of this that is about cross-examination. But what I wanted to start with are a couple of guidelines about how this lecture is going to work. I'm going to break it up, believe, into three portions. And as most debaters, I'll talk fairly fast. If at any point I use a term that you're not familiar with, or I say something that you don't understand, you can raise your hand or just blurt something out to get my attention. I don't have a problem with being interrupted at all. The key is for y'all to learn something. I don't really have any other reason to be here other than that. So I'm sort of here for you, so let's make this productive for you. I would ask that you take as good notes as you can. I'll try to use an outline. There'll be some stories. There'll be times where you have questions that you might get away from the outline. But as far as we might stray, I'll try to bring us back to that. And within those three sections, there'll be times in each of them where I'll ask if you have any questions. If you have any that are more conceptual at that point, feel free. Obviously, as all debaters, I'm sure there's going to be times where you want to either ask me about war stories or share some with me, because that seems to be how we communicate with each other. That's perfectly fine. We can definitely learn by anecdote. Here's the deal. I would like for you to, like I said, take good notes, and I'm going to help you by using the outline to break it down big picture and then sections. So Roman numeral 1 is the big picture. And these are 5 subpoints that are going to frame the rest of the lecture that I'm going to give. The first would be A, debate as an intellectual beauty pageant. Okay. I use this term intellectual beauty pageant. I've used it for a couple of decades now. By the way, I've been the director of debate at the University of West Georgia since 1995, so for 18 years, probably longer than most of you have been alive. And before that, I was assistant coach here at GDI for 2 years when I was getting my master's. And before that, I debated at West Georgia for 4 years. So I've been in collegiate debate now for 24 years. I'm about to start my 25th year this coming year. So when I talk to you about my college debate, I'm talking about a quarter century of experience that I have. And so even if I'm not super wise because of innate intelligence, at this point, I've been burned enough, scarred enough, and remember enough of those war stories that I can share with you information that I think would be really useful. So when I begin with the 8th subpoint, debate intellectual beauty pageant, here's what I mean. How many of you play a sport at your school? The first gentleman was there. What's your name?
Yeah.
Deontay? What do you play?
I play baseball and basketball.
Okay, sure. Let's start with basketball. How do you score in basketball?
By making sure that you have good offense.
No, I'm asking for a much more definitional. Like, how do you score? What's
Shoot best.
Basket. There's a basket. You put the ball in the basket.
Right.
Okay. How do you score in baseball?
You make sure you do home run.
Somebody crosses the plate. Right. Okay. Cool. How do you score in debate?
Where you hit across the plate.
Offense.
It's a lot harder to define in debate because there's not a plate, there's not a basket, there's not a goal. Okay. The reason why I call it the intellectual beauty pageant is because unlike sports like baseball, basketball, football, debate is much more akin to, if you were going to relate it to a sport, something like gymnastics or boxing, where even in boxing it's possible to knock your opponent out. Right? You can punch them, they fall to the ground, they don't get up to the count of 10. In debate, there is no knockout like that. Well, that's not true. There have been instances where people quit and run crying from the room. In fact, I've often told my debaters that's the ultimate goal for any debate, is to make your opponents quit. Right? That's the only way you can guarantee a victory, where the judge doesn't have to intervene. Right? Otherwise, it's up to someone else to determine whether you score. You don't get to determine whether you score. In football, you cross the goal line, and the referee has to give you the touchdown symbol. In debate, the judge doesn't have to determine that your winning argument that you think you're awesome at is a winning argument. They can tell you at the end of the round that it's a losing argument. What I want to stress to you with this first subpoint when I say debate is an intellectual beauty pageant is 2 things. One is that it is subjective. Right? It is subjective. So what we're going to talk about today is impression management. How do we manage the impressions that we give to the judges, or that the judge has of us? And the second point is the judge, the ballot. That in debate, unlike in other sports where there is an absolute certain victory through scoring, in debate there is no absolute certain victory. 3 judges judge the same debate. 2 of them thinks the affirmative wins. 1 of them thinks the negative wins. Which judges are right? Well, in our game, we say that the judge is on top of the decision. The 2 judges are right. But how many of you have ever been, how many of you in this room have ever debated before? We have people who have experience debate. How many of you ever debated where there was a panel? Okay? How many of you ever had a panel that was a split decision? How many of you ever had a round where you lost a split decision and thought you won? Okay, there you go. Right? There have been times where two judges voted against you, but you think the judge, probably most of the time, you think the judge that voted for you was right. That's what I mean by intellectual beauty pageant. So what we're going to be talking about in this morning's lectures is how do we manage that beauty pageant? How do we increase the likelihood that the judge will view us most beautifously? Okay? We want the judge to think we're most beautiful. Yes?
The way that you describe me is still kind of confusing me.
Okay?
Like, what do you mean by, like, beautifying debate? And, like,
Well, I have 2 hours to lay some of this out.
okay.
Yeah. My point that I want to stress in the beginning is there's no secret of here's how you win a debate. Here's the one thing you need to do. Right? Because there's not one judge. Right? I judge debate. Hayes judges debates. Okay? We judge the same debate. He thinks that the disad outweighed the case because of probability. I think the case outweighed the disad because of time frame. We're both right in our own heads. We're smart people. We care about debate. We have integrity. We listened to what you said. We wrote it down. We thought about it. At the end of the round, we came up with a different decision. Right? There's only 2 of us. So who won the debate? If there's only 2 judges, it's a split. No one won the debate. If there's a 3rd judge, if that judge voted the same way Hayes did, then in that particular round, Hayes is right in that he's on the majority, and I'm wrong in that I'm in the minority. But it doesn't mean I don't think I made the right decision. I tried looking hard. I'm a judge. I care. I debated a lot, and I wanted judges to judge the way I'm judging now. Right? So that first point that I want to stress to you, which can be very frustrating for debaters, is you don't have control over the activity the way you do in other sports. Right? You can go home every day and practice your jump shot or practice free throws in basketball and get really good at scoring. You can do those same sorts of practice methods in debate. In fact, one of the things I'm going to stress to you is to practice. But it's never going to guarantee that you have a jump shot that scores every time. What it's going to guarantee is that you are the best debater that you can be. So that's what I want to talk about over the course of the next couple of hours. B subpoint. Points, and by that I mean speaker points, are more likely to be lost than they are to be won. Speaker points are more likely to be lost than they are to be won. And this is where I'm going to talk about the cantankerous judge. Because I can be a cantankerous judge. We tend to remember the negative stuff, by we I mean judges, than we do the positive stuff. We tend to punish you more for the things that you're not doing, or the things that you did that annoyed us, than we do reward you for the things that you did that were good. Because in a sense, the judge is kind of expecting you to be a decent debater. And so you're never going to get the full credit for the stuff that you do good as much as you're going to be punished for the things that you do poorly. I'm giving you this subpoint so that you understand right now. When I tell you, ooh, don't do that, that's annoying, or most judges don't like it when you do this, you need to make sure you highlight those parts of this lecture. Because even if you aren't willing to practice a whole lot, you can be less annoying. Okay? There are things that you do currently, or that debaters around you are doing currently, that you just don't need to do. And I'll get into several of those in examples. But I want to start with understanding that it's much easier to lose speaker points than it is to gain speaker points. And once they've been lost, they are very hard to recover. C subpoint. Habits are not merely practiced, they are lived. Habits are not merely practiced, they are lived. Many of the kernels or nuggets of wisdom I'm going to give you this morning, I have learned from the debate coaches that have judged me or that I've worked with over the last quarter century. This particular one is from a gentleman who was the director of debate at Wake Forest for many, many years, Ross Smith. He once said that doing a debate practice method once a week for an hour is not as productive as doing that same practice method 3 times a week for 20 minutes. Okay? So quantitatively, we're talking about the same amount of time, an hour's worth of practice. His point was, if you'll break it down and do it 3 times a week for 20 minutes, it will be more beneficial to you than if you only do it once a week for an hour. That's also true of physical exercise, by the way. If you've ever had a physical trainer, they'll tell you it is better to exercise 3 to 4 times a week than it is once a week, even if that once a week is the same number, same amount of time. Right? But your body needs to get used to it. So when we talk about these things that are good for you in debate, that are going to help you be a better speaker, the key is to practice them as often as possible, even if you don't practice them for as much time each individual practice session. For example, how many of you practice reading? Unless he's
Speed
studying.
reading?
Yeah, reading. It doesn't have to be speed, literally just talking out loud, like I'm doing right now. It'd be great if it was that. But one of the things you need to recognize is debate is an oral activity. Or at least at one time it was. And it's slowly becoming less and less so. Voice, projecting your voice through a room like this, is a physical act. Right? You are pushing air from your lungs past your vocal cords at a volume that everyone in the back row can hear. We're going to talk about that later on. This is a physical exercise, practicing it so that you don't get tired, so that your voice at the end of the day doesn't sound like this. Those are physical exercises you need to do. Doing a little bit of that each day is impacting. If all you did was read the 1AC or your 1NC each day, that's an 8-minute speech. Just read it each day. Just 8 minutes of practice. That would be an extremely beneficial exercise for you. It builds up your stamina. Builds up your stamina. Okay. D, debate like a judge. This is a phrase I use quite a bit. What I mean by that is, ultimately, you should be asking yourself this, or maybe I should ask you the question. How many of you want to win? Raise your hand if you'd rather win debates than lose debates. Okay. I kind of need this to be unanimous. It's going to be tough you should not spend 2 weeks in debate camp if this is not something you're interested in. If you just want to lose, all you have to do is walk in the round. It will happen. Okay? But if you want to win, then ask yourself this. How do you win a debate? The answer to how you win a debate is a judge vote screen. That's the brass tacks of debate. That's why I say it's like an intellectual. That may be correct, but in the end, you are factually incorrect. You did not win the debate in which the judge signed it out for the other team. The other team won that debate, I promise. The tablet is recording that as a victory for your opponent. Right? At the end of the day, the cumulative sheet is going to show that as a big L on your score sheet. So, if the goal is to win a debate, which you've all said you want to do, and the method by which you win a debate is convincing a judge to vote for you, then the process by which we achieve our goal is determining what can we do to get a judge to vote for us. And so when I say debate like a judge, what the first thing you need to recognize is, what do I need to do so that the judge thinks I'm winning? And that's what this entire lecture is going to be about this morning, is what can I do? What are the little things that I didn't even realize matter to judges can I do to improve the likelihood that I'm going to be guided by the question, what words or actions will help me convince the judge that I have won? When I say debate like a judge, ultimately what I'm going to tell you to do is to think like a judge. What would a judge want me to say? What arguments would a judge want me to extend? What issues would a judge want me to focus on? How would a judge want me to act before the round, during the round, and after the round, so that that judge is more likely to vote for me? Intellectual feedback. Finally, E. Exceptions are not rules. I'm going to talk to you a lot this morning about things that will increase the chance that you'll win a debate. In every one of those instances, there have been successful debaters who not only didn't do that, but seemingly did the opposite. Okay? What I don't want you to come away from understanding this anecdotal exceptions is, well, if it worked for them, it'll work for me. Okay? Remember, there is always a winner in Russian roulette. There's a winner in Russian roulette. That doesn't mean that you should play Russian roulette. Okay? But somebody wins, you're right. 5 people lose, 6 people lose, 1 person wins. Just because there's an exception doesn't mean that becomes the rule. Okay? Just because there's a winner in Russian roulette doesn't mean it's not a dangerous game to play. Sure, there are people who aren't very clear. There are people who don't do all of the various things I'm going to talk to you about, and they still win speaker awards. That doesn't disprove the rules that I'm going to tell you about. It means that there are exceptions. Sometimes people can overcome those. They're not, if I give you a list of 10 things that you can do to make yourself a better speaker, they're doing the opposite of 2 of them, but they are often the other 8. Right? So don't misperceive the exceptions as disproving the rule. Okay, those are the ground rules that I want you to think about. Let's move on to Roman number 2. Little things mean a lot. Is the title of this. Little things mean a lot. Before I begin the ASIP, I have a question. When does the debate round start? Now,
when the judge walks in.
As soon as you walk in the room.
When the judge walks in. Before the judge.
not necessarily.
Today.
When parents are.
There you go. When pairings come out. The moment a pairing has been released, The debate round has started. The debate round has started. And the reason why I say the moment the period is released, because once you know who your opponent is, who the judge is, and what room you're debating in, every action that you take following that moment is part of that round, whether you have recognized it in the past or not. So the ASA point is called before the 1AC starts. The moment the period is released, everything you do following that period release, whether you have recognized it or not, is building toward, am I acting like a team that's going to win this debate, or am I acting like a team that is going to lose this debate? Everything that you do. Everything. So, with the ASO point, number one is be prepared. Number one is be prepared. I've got a little A, a little B, and a little C to this. Little A is have equipment. Who can give me the equipment that you need in the debate round? Flow paper. Timer. Let's talk about timer. How many timers should you have?
3.
Why 3? Requires 6, 5.
Because people steal your timers all the time.
Okay. What's your name, sir? Ty? Yeah, Ty. Okay. Ty says 3 because 1 for you, 1 for your partner, and 1 for the judge. I've heard some people say 4, you should also have 1 for your opponent because they're going to be lazy and forget to bring theirs and ask if they can borrow yours and then they're going to break it. Ty's like, I'm just telling you that. I like that. I don't mind that at all. They are your opponent. I'm not sure why I should be running them. But some of you are nice. It's been like, no, I'm going to go 4. I think Ricardo said 5 because eventually one of yours is going to break. Right? We have some extras. The point being that, yes, a timer is necessary. Recognize right now, you're probably going to need more than 1. Right? At a minimum, 2. At an absolute minimum, 2. You can always your phone. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The point being, more than 1 timer. I heard flow paper. What else? Pens. Pens. Got to have some pens. More than 1, right?
Have your home, your evidence and everything.
Yeah. A laptop. I think Tyler earlier said laptop. You got to have whatever your files are on. If they're on your computer, if you have paper files, those sorts of things.
Flash drive.
Yeah. Flash drives. However you plan on sharing your files through the debates. Equipment. Have equipment. For some reason, there was this trend for a while, and it still exists sort of out there, that it's cool to not have equipment. Like, oh, we didn't bring any flow paper. It was so cool. We knew we were coming to this debate tournament. We were just going to borrow paper from people. We're going to slack the cool people that don't bring stuff and just borrow from other people. As a judge, if I get a debate round, and there's one team who is perpetually having to borrow equipment from someone else, I question how much they care about winning. Because what happens when you debate tie, and you didn't bring the timer? SOL. You didn't get no time, right? So you're not cool and slack. You're not being all hipsterish cool. Look, I brought my headband and I brought my cool, good luck charm that we set in front of us when we give our speeches. And we didn't bring flow paper. Well, Ty's not letting you borrow the flow paper. So how's that going to work out for you? Right? When I walk into a room, I immediately start judging the debate. Before the speeches begin, I'm judging them. I am judgmental. Who looks like they want to win? Having equipment is the first test. Do you have the basics? If you don't have flow paper, my guess is you aren't good at debate. It's not you're too cool for flow paper. You're so good they don't even need flow paper. They have a photographic memory that allows them to just immediately pick up 8 minutes of speech and remember what's going on. No, I assume they don't care if they lose their debate. They didn't bring anything, they're just chilling. They came because their mom wanted them to participate in extracurricular, and they're not physically gifted enough to play sports. Yeah. B, get to debate on time. Get set up. Be ready to go. Showing up late may be something that one of your dating websites has told you that's cool. Yeah, you don't want to give off the vibe that you're desperate. So make sure you show up 5 or 10 minutes late. Right? The team that shows up 5 minutes late to my round is starting off at a much lower speaker range. The team that shows up 10 minutes isn't going to find me in the room because I've gone to ask the tavern if I can forfeit them. Okay? So get to your round on time. We don't have anything else to do, people. It's Saturday morning. It's 8 a.m. We just spent a night in the Holiday Inn Express where we ate Waffle House at 2 a.m. Right? We don't have any, it's freaking Calhoun, Georgia. We don't have anything else to do in this town. The only reason we're here is for a debate tournament. What were you doing? right? Your Facebook update could wait until lunch. You know? I don't know if you're like hanging out at the gym or something, getting your morning workout in. This is a debate tournament. You came to a debate tournament. Debate. Get here on time. Okay? Be ready to go. If your computer is slow, it acts up all the time, telling me that the first time we met, the first thing I think is, you don't understand that your computer's slow? Why do you have it already set up? Like, why are you having to tell me that my computer's always like this? Really? So is that why I'm having to wait? You can get your money sleep. If you knew it was already like this, and yet now you're delaying me, you're not a good debater. Right? You're not smart enough to recognize how to compensate for your technological inadequacies. That's not a good debater. Be ready to go. C, know your files. Know what you've got. Anecdote. First year in college debate. This is back before computers existed. Right? This is when we were like using stone tablets to crank out our evidence. And we were debating a fossil fuel topic, and one of the large affirmative that year was essentially CAFE standards, automobile efficiency, fuel efficiency standards. Went to my first tournament. We're debating a team that's running CAFE. And so I'm digging through my files, CAFE. Oh man, I know we had this file. Where's my CAFE file at? I can't find it. Could not find it. Debate the whole round. What ability you won with some dumb argument afterwards? Oh right, I filed it with automobile efficiency as opposed to CAFE. Right? I was a dummy. I didn't know my files. Gotta know your files. Know what you have in file. Right? Those are basics. So be prepared means have the equipment, be ready to go, know your files. That's basics. Right? Notice we haven't gotten to do I have a good debate and I actually talk. Right? Do people understand the words that I say? Do I use logic? You know what I mean? Basics. Do I have pen open? Do I have a timer? Did I come to the right room? Right? Is my partner here, or do they have a bladder that doesn't exist? And so they're constantly and instantly in the bathroom. My partner's in the bathroom. They forgot to go to the catheter. Okay, 2, attitude. I have an A, B, and C to do this as well. Attitude. Act like you want to be there, little A. Little A, act like you want to be there. Look, I know it's early. I'm not a morning person either. But one of the things that we did when we signed up for debate is we accepted the sacrifice of, we've got to be here with me. I'm a judge. I don't gain anything from this activity. Like after I judged the debate and I judged it, what, like, and I smoked that, man. I filled all the arguments. There's no like positive in my life that I gained from judging the debate. Okay? Like, ooh, I'm undefeated. I judged all my rounds correctly. You know? Like, I showed up. I was there on time. Where were you? Right? Act like you want to be there means, how about a smile every once in a while? How about this right now? Everybody, just as an exercise. Show me the smile. Yeah, it can be a fake one. It's perfectly fine. Okay, good. Feel free to fake it. That's perfectly fine. I'm not, look, it isn't like I showed up and I told everybody so excited to be here. That's awesome. It's that we can act like we want to be here. Right? This is what I get. I judge teams sometimes, and they seem to not be having a good time. I tell my debaters in college, and this should be true of high school debate as well, debate is an extracurricular activity. If you are not enjoying it, quit. Go do something else. Why on God's green earth would you spend the amount of time, the amount of energy, the amount of brain power that is necessary to invest in debate to be successful if you want to enjoy it? Why would you do that? If you were a masochist, there's much more efficient ways to be masochistic. You just cut yourself. Okay? This is way, I guess you could be like an inefficient masochist or something. At which point there's probably much better ways. Try swimming the English Channel. You know? Debate is way too time intensive if you do not enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, quit it. Go do something else. There are plenty of your school probably has a band or theater, or they have those clubs where you don't have to do anything, like Key Club or Faith Club or Boca, all of those. Right? You just basically show up and you get to be treasured. Right? Debate's way too time intensive if you're not enjoying it. So act like you want to be there. Little B. Act like you've been there before. Act like you've been there before. Even if you haven't, act like you've been there before. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. One is, judges do not want you to suck up to them. Right? This is a general rule. How about this? So, let's see. Yes, the other. Okay.
Do you think that's what you mean by that you make a conversation?
Yeah, that's where I'm getting now. I'll use you as an example. Let's say Deontay knows me from outside of the game. Like met him when he was playing basketball or baseball or something. So he walks in the room and he's like, oh, it's Hester. I know Hester. I know Deontay knows him. I know him. Okay? Nothing is going to be gained positive from the judge's perspective if Deontay's like, hey, Hester, what's up? How are you doing? Yeah, cool. So, remember that time I saw you that one time at baseball? Remember that? That was awesome, wasn't it? And that is just it's so clearly that's a move to try to intimidate the other team that I know they did. And because I know them, even though I'm not a debater, they're going to vote for me because we know each other. It would be a bit. Okay? No, that's stupid. Right? For one, if I'm a judge that knows you and you start talking like that, in my mind, what I'm thinking is, I'm getting scared he's going to lose this debate, and he's having to rely on some non-debate reason to suck up to me, to know me. Right? Same thing like, oh, Hester, that is an awesome West Georgia shirt. Where'd you get that West Georgia shirt? Really? You got to a place that sells West Georgia shirts? That's so cool. How did you know they sold West Georgia shirts? Because you go to West Georgia? Wow, that's really interesting. You're so smart. Like, seriously, stop. When I do stuff like that, that's just true of class in general. I do enjoy making small talk with my students before the class, but not in some cheesy way like that. Who hangs out with their friends and talks like that? People that don't have friends, right? When you talk like that, I'm thinking you're a bad debater. And you're having to rely on things that have nothing to do with debate. Unfortunately, you're not even good at choosing those non-debate things, right? Because if this is what it's going to be about, just come split me a 5. Make it a 10, and I'll just give you some points, right? I don't want to hear like what you did for some organization. I'm not interested in you chatting it up with me before the round. Act like you did it before. What are we there to do? We are there to engage in an objective game in which both teams have an opportunity to win a debate. And because you know me, that should not give you extra sort of brownie points. And seeking them makes me think that you think you need them. It's what puts you in a deficit. We'll see. Act like you want to win. Act like you want to win. By that, I mean, at the end of the round, when the judge has made a decision and you've lost, I don't want you to throw anything across the room.
I'll deal with it later. Right on paper.
Act like you want to win means it would be nice if at the end of the debate or during the debate, I got the sense that you cared about what you were doing. Right? If you're just sort of going through the motions, reading stuff, process, that doesn't give me, oh wow, they're so cool. They don't need to win because they're so cool. Obviously, I should vote for them because they're so cool. Instead, I think they don't care about winning, so why would I not to vote for them? I don't care. I can tell you right now, I could not care less about who wins the debate. It does not matter to me. I've judged so many of them at this point. When I say it, when I'm talking to a new judge, they're scared like, oh, Hester, I'm worried, I'm not going to judge. I'm like, you got a 50-50 chance to get it right. There's only 2 choices. And there's either the apple or the egg. In general, they probably both are not going to be very good. So, vote for the lesser of 2 evils. You'll be okay. Right? So I don't care who wins the debate. What I need to hear from you is that you care, you want to win, you try hard. You can give that vibe off. Giving off the opposite vibe may help you pick up the pretty girl or the pretty boy at school, because obviously I'm so cool, I don't need a date. That's why everybody wants to date. But in debate, it's just the opposite. When you're acting too cool for the ballot, that means you don't need this ballot. I'm going to give it to the desperate team. They're desperate. For just a few ballots a day, I can sustain them. So that's what I need you to know about attitude. Number 3, fashion, question mark. Number 3 is fashion, question mark. This is a very tough issue for me, as you can tell from my fashion choices. In general, when I teach my public speaking class, I tell them at the very beginning that I don't care what they wear to give their speeches in. I personally don't believe that what fashion allowance or clothing allowance your rich parents have given you to spend should determine your grade in my public speaking class. Same thing with debate. I honestly think that it's a form of socioeconomic discrimination to say, well, that person was wearing a tie, so obviously I should give them better points. I'm just having the Jews wear a star to determine who they are. What are you doing? What are you doing? Why would you do this? Having said that, this is what I also tell my public speaking class. I'm like, I control this class. I control your grade in this class. So we're not going to have that form of fashion discrimination. I don't care what you wear. However, when you leave this room and you go to a job interview, they're not going to be like you. And there are going to be people that judge you by what you wear. So having said that, here's my advice for fashion. You should wear something that's comfortable. Number 1, debate is a long, grueling day. Be an usually rooms that are not ventilated properly, with opponents that did not bathe properly. Okay? So comfort is important. Very, very important. With that, try to wear something that would not offend someone's grandparents. Right? That should be your general rule. Does my clothing offend grandparents? Should be a general rule. Are there words on my T-shirt that other people would be unwilling to say but only use the first word? Does my fashion, would my fashion get me in trouble with people where there are places that have decency? Is it too short? Is it too long? Is it too whatever? That's not.
I'm just wondering, why is there such like a hoopla about people and the way they dress them? Is it just like a mentality that's put in the debate community?
Like, yes, part of it is the long-standing history of debate is a formal public speaking activity, and you should be dressed nicely because we want to convey the same professionalism that is perceived in the business world, right? Why do we call it business? Why do you need to wear a suit in your business? Why is a necktie? Think about what a necktie is, just for a second. Just take a moment and think about, what does a necktie do? Right, it's not like suspenders. Suspenders actually perform a function. What does a necktie do? It keeps your collar together? Like, what does it doesn't do anything. So you just think it's strings, So it literally is a completely unnecessary accessory. And yet, you go to a job interview, and you're a dude, and you don't have a tie, right? You're a chick, and you don't have your pantsuit, your Hillary Clinton pantsuit, or your nice, like, black skirt with matching black jacket. You're not getting that job. Why? What's that job? Why is your job as a computer programmer requiring you? And we know every computer programmer is going to end up wearing their shorts and their Crocs and some random T-shirt. Maybe they're computer programmers. I don't know why that's the case, Todd, but unfortunately it is. And if I could lead a successful crusade so that we no longer gave a crap about what people wore and actually judged them by the content of their character and not the color of their Armani, then I would do that. But unfortunately, I have failed to convince other people of that. And so here's my advice on fashion is, no one has ever been penalized because they looked nice. And by nice, I mean the traditional standard. No one has ever been penalized for dressing up in a debate. That's a good way to think about it. Right? No one's ever lost a debate because they were dressed too nicely. Having said that, ultimately you should wear what you think is comfortable and be willing to accept the consequences. Okay. The consequences are the judge doesn't like that you didn't dress up. Yeah, there are judges out there like that. It's sad, but it's true. Right? My suggestion would be that it's not a bad idea. You're getting talked to by a dude that's getting a lecture in shorts. But my idea would be wear some long pants. In general, not a bad idea. Closed-toed shoes, unless they're heels. Have a tie. You don't have to wear it, just bring it with you. You get that one judge in the pool that, oh, they got to wear a tie for this judge. You know what I mean? You strap it on and have your like, green tie with your blue shirt or whatever. And you look weird, but they're like, oh, tie, that's awesome. Excellent tie choice. So what? Okay, so that's the A subpoint before the 1AC starts.
I see what you did there.
Let's do the B subpoint now. This is speaker points are a reflection of more than just the speeches. B subpoint, speaker points are a reflection of more than just the speeches. Number one, flowing. Flowing. What is flowing?
Basically taking notes and then you write down what arguments that you're going to make.
Yeah. Just taking notes. What the other team is saying. Taking notes of what your partner is saying. It's just taking notes. Not a big deal at all. Having said that, I want to give you 3 tips to flowing. And I'm sure you've already learned all this stuff. This is just mine to add to the list of other things that you have. When I'm teaching flowing, I break it down to 3 things. Little A, vertical, not horizontal. Simply put, in today's lecture, when I'm talking to you, there's only one person basically. It's basically one monologue. So you're writing like this. Or typing like this. That's horizontal. In debate, there's not just one person talking. There are multiple people talking. And so all I ask that you do, go vertical. Vertical, not horizontal. Tip number 1, very easy.
Okay? It means that you should think of, if you have lined paper, the margin at the far left, think of that as a column. You want to put your ideas, or the ideas of your opponent when you're speaking, in that column. Very simple. Tip number 2, abbreviate. In fact, my tip B is eliminate, abbreviate, don't deviate. Eliminate unnecessary words when you're taking notes. You're not a stenographer. A stenographer is attempting to accurately record every word that was spoken. That is unnecessary when taking notes. Instead, we eliminate articles, A, B, and basically subject verb, subject verb, subject verb. Second, abbreviate. And this is important. Back in the old days, olden times, there were classes called shorthand that you would take, in which you would learn a very rigorous and rigid understanding of small abbreviated symbols that stood for larger words and phrases. We don't really teach shorthand anymore. Instead, y'all have learned to text. Right? You already abbreviate in your lives. LOL. Right?
LMA.
Yes, LOLs. Waffle. Okay? The point being, it doesn't matter, and this is what I mean by don't deviate. It does not matter what system abbreviation you use, as long as whichever one you use consistently. For example, in debate when I'm judging, this means increase, arrow up. This means decrease. You get a lot of that in debate. For me, this is a cause, which is distinct from equals. But I make sure I always use the same symbols. When I'm talking, when someone's reading a spelling disadvantage, right? Whatever symbols you choose, be consistent with them. Remember, your notes are your notes. I don't need to know what your shorthand is. You need to know what your shorthand is. If you learn to use the same symbols over and over again, you'll get really quick. The reason why you're abbreviating, remember, is because people are talking really fast. People are talking really fast. Finally, number 3 is line-by-line reputation. The reason why we ask you to do vertical, not horizontal, is because the next speaker is probably, hopefully, please God, hopefully, have something to say about what you said. They're going to try to repeat what you said. You had 5 points. Well, they caught the first one, so they say something about it, and be right there. But when it came down to your second point, they kind of skipped over it. They did not really get that one close. Instead, they skipped ahead, and they're now talking about the third thing that you said. So you leave a space there, and you flow here. They also did not catch your fourth or fifth argument. So at the end of your speech, you have 5. At the end of their speech, they said 6 things, but they did not say 6 things to each of your 5. They only said 3 here and 3 here, which means there are arguments that are on the flow that were not answered. This system in debate is time-tested as a great way to understand what's going on in debate. When judges are flowing you, this is how they're flowing you. Okay? They are flowing you in a sense of most of them, not all of them, but most of them are using line-by-line reputation. So when I'm judging a debate and the second speech has not answered 3 of the arguments, I know that they haven't answered those arguments because I can see on my flow what's going on. Very simple, 3 tips of flowing. Vertical, not horizontal, abbreviate and eliminate, do not deviate, and finally, line-by-line reputation. That's all it takes to flow. Ty?
If they're like the people that sometimes it's finding hard to, I guess, signpost, or I'm a person who is yet to kind of like figure out what arguments are actually supposed to be put where, and I can't follow the flow of things. Like, let's say on politics, someone makes like, full cap non-important and like a thumper argument, something like that, and they just don't label it, and I can't figure it out. How am I supposed to flow that if I can't figure it out on the spot?
Well, one thing we're going to talk about later on is how cross-examination can help deal with some of that. Early on, what you need to do is find a system that works for you. So if initially you're having a hard time knowing where to, better to get it down even than miss it altogether. Yes, absolutely. Ty brings up a great point, which is early on, if your problem is, I don't know where to put it, get it down. Because it's going to be really hard to remember they said it if you forgot to write it down. So first things first, get it down. Then we'll start moving it around. Okay, any other questions about flow? Next up, prep time. Let's talk about prep time. The reminder that I want to suggest here is we're talking about how to get better speaker points. Right? This is how to get better speaker points. I'm not talking about speeches here. How is this going to improve? How is flowing going to improve your speaker points? Who can give me an answer to that question? Yes, what's your name?
Rachel.
Rachel, how does flowing increase your speaker points?
Well, if you're flowing, it looks like you're paying attention. You aren't taking care about winning the debate.
Attitude. It looks like you're winning. Look at them taking notes. Wow, look at that. Number 2. Alex, what's your name?
Arjun.
Arjun?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you a better debater because you're actually responding to what the other team said. Right? So it suggests to the judge that you care. Oh, look at them taking notes. It gives you the ability to answer what your opponent has said. And those are 2 critical things that are going to improve your speaker points. Right? Okay, like I said, number 2, prep time. I have an A, B, and C, and a D. Letter A. Don't waste it. Don't waste it. It is finite. No matter what they tell you, prep time is never ending. It is finite. Because time is not ending. If you don't enter the prep time, then it's not ending time. Not in this dimension. Don't waste it means, what should I have already prepared before the round started? Earlier on, when I asked the question when the debate round started, someone said before the tournament. Who said that? What was your name?
Brianna.
What is your name?
Yes.
Brianna. Yeah, Brianna. What did you mean by that?
Because if you're the affirmative, then you know what your speech is, and you can be prepared for that. And
How so?
Because you can already make your 1AC. You can make 2 AC blocks for the 1AC and different.
Hey, hold on. Whoa. Slow down a second. If you say that I do not have to wait until I walk into a debate round to construct my speeches,
Yes, sir.
holy smokes. Wow. Right? You all understand how this works, correct? You came to a debate camp. Like you all, this is a debate camp, right? This isn't like FDA. So I definitely should have worn my business. Brianna is totally right. You get to do work before your debate term. What is next year's topic? Suggestion. Do not attempt to answer a question upon immediately answering the question. Yes, what's your name, sir? Tyrion? Tyrion. It's much more narrow than I was expecting.
The United States
Rachel began her answer with resolve. So that sounds like resolve.
Resolve, the United States federal government should substantially increase its economic engagement toward Cuba, Mexico, or Venezuela.
Oh, so I think you like come up with a different resolution for next year's house.
No. So next year we're going to be debating economic engagement with 3 countries in Latin America.
Yeah.
Okay. We know that now. How many of you have already started doing research on this? Some of you who talked about the Cuba oil out, I want to say they had to do things like that. Okay, cool. Look at you doing work. Wow. And you keep caring about faith. Okay, that's what we mean. When Brianna says the tournament starts, the debate starts before the tournament, this is what she means. She's doing work. She walks into the room with her 1AC that she's practiced. It's not just your 1AC, you're negative. Right? Who can give me a diss out on next year's topic? Spending. Politics. China.
Oil.
Yeah, oil, right? We can rattle off 5 or 6 pretty easily. Those are arguments that we worked on. When you walk into a debate round and the speech starts and you're negative and the 1AC starts talking about Cuba oil, you should not look at your partner and be like, what? Cuba? What is this Cuba? Only talking about Venezuela. Why are they not talking about Venezuela? Perhaps we should learn hospitality. Yeah, exactly. Who's laughing partner if they did something like that? So, we're going to talk about stopping your partner. There are rules and regulations for that.
Yeah, that's assault.
Here's my point. What Brianna said about when the tournament starts and how you can do work prior to the tournament starting is my point for prep time when I say don't waste it. Don't waste it means the prep time that you have in a debate should be used for things that happen in that debate that you need to get prepared for that you could not have already prepared for. Right? Like, for example, I can rattle off 17 to 20 negative arguments. That doesn't mean you're going to hear the same 17 or 20 every day. So you're the second affirmative constructor. You're the 2AC. The 1MC is speaking. As they are reading a topicality violation and a counter plan and a critique and two disads, that's when you begin to put together your 2AC arguments. But the front line, does everybody know when I say a front line what that is? Right? Yeah, a front line are the list of answers that you would use to answer an oil decide. You already have some of that constructed. You simply plug it into your speech doc. You don't construct, it isn't like, oh my gosh, what? They talked about Cuba, let me jump on the interwebs and do some research on Cuba. No, that's not how that works. You should have already done the work. Don't waste this little A. Little B. Little B, don't steal it. Don't steal prep time. Do not steal prep time. Stealing prep time means in your moments in debate where you are continuing to prepare for your speeches, but you have indicated to the judge that you are ready, and so the judge has stopped prep time, but you are still prepping, so you're now prepping outside of the prep time. You are now violating the norm of prepping outside of prep time. Example, you're at the 2AC. You tell the judge, I'm ready. Okay, the judge has now stopped the timer. All I have to do is jump this to them. And then instead of jumping this to them, you're like, I think the computer, forceful pressing. You're trying to just read something apart. That's prepping, right? Or the other team was prepping, and while they were prepping, you should be prepping, right? So the 2&C has finished. The cross-examination of the 2&C has occurred. The 1&R needed a minute of prep, which they shouldn't have, or whatever. They needed some. While they're prepping, the 1&R is prepping against the 2&C, right? They're getting their stuff together. The 1&R says, okay, I'm done, and they start setting up their stand, or rubbing their lucky charm. You, as the 1&R, should stop prepping during that time as well. Right? That's what I mean by don't steal prep time. You should only be preparing for your speeches during a speech, during cross-ex, or while prep time is running. You should not be prepping at other times in the day. That matters. There are judges who take that very seriously. Little C. Don't assume it's a cloaking device. Do not assume that prep time is a cloaking device. Here's what I mean by cloaking device for those of you who don't follow the side by. I can hear you when you're talking like this. So when you tell your partner, I didn't understand that critique at all. Did you try to give me something over that? I can hear you.
That's why I write it down.
Yes. And so when you're telling your partner, oh my God, I don't have any answers to that. I don't think the judge knows. I can hear you. Okay, I can hear you. Secondly is the reverse. That is damaging to you because now I think that you don't know what's going on. But the reverse is also true. During your prep time for the 2AR, you're the 1AR and you're talking to your partner and you're doing one of these. Today is so dumb. Oh yeah, you should definitely tell him. And don't try to coach me about how I'm going to judge the debate later on. It annoys me when the team is talking to each other in voices that I can hear, trying to persuade me about something they haven't told me. Right? Prep time is not a cloaking device. Simply means think amongst yourselves. I don't want to deal with your business. Okay? I want to hear you do your stuff. I'm trying to ignore you as best I can. Okay? Much like you, I'm on my Facebook. I'm doing my Angry Birds. Whatever it is you're currently doing. Okay. D, finally D. Learn to control your bladder. Learn to control your bladder. Debate is an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, but it is not a continuous hour and 45 minutes. There are breaks that occur. The 2&C is going to take 2 or 3 minutes of prep. The 2AC is going to take a minute or 2 of prep. The last 2 rebuttals are definitely going to use up the remainder of the prep time. Those are opportunities for anyone to go run and use the restroom. You only got 2 speeches in a debate. You're the 1NC and the 1NR. If I have to stop the debate because prior to the 1NC and prior to the 1NR, you have to go to the bathroom, while I have some sympathy for you, because obviously you have some sort of GI issue going on, okay? I also begin to wonder, do they really need to use the restroom, or is this a chance for them to steal prep time? Sorry.
So this is, you said like 1 second ago about whispering. Do you have like any recommendations, like maybe like things that we're not sure about instead of whispering them real loud and telling you like, hey, we really don't know what the hell we're talking about. Like, is there any recommendations like to make prep time and talking to your partner advantageous rather than just being like stuffy? I don't know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you want to maximize what's going on and you don't have any idea, I can give you, everybody just take notes for this. These are arguments that universally work in debate. The number one argument that universally works in debate is no internal link. No internal link. The likelihood that your opponent has strung together two claims that don't actually connect to each other is very high. A subpoint, plans unpopular, B subpoint, nuclear war. Right? That happens all the time in debate. So no internal link is almost guaranteed to be true. Which means you can say it and not even fully understand what you mean by it. Okay? If you are on an argument and you aren't sure what the problem is, how you're going to answer, make sure you say no internal link. Yes?
You won't have to explain no internal
It would help if you did. It would help if you explained where the problem is. And that's where you should at least be able to parrot back something that says, no internal link between their initial link and the impact, no internal link between their impact scenario and the decision rule, no internal link between like anything that you can describe would be useful. Okay, but no internal link is always a good anchor. Number two, not as universally true, but almost as universally true, their evidence doesn't say what they claim it says. When in doubt, assume that the tag that they've given the evidence and the evidence itself are not the same. Debaters love to exaggerate what their piece of evidence says. The beauty of their evidence doesn't say what they claim it does is that argument can then become anything else. Like if the evidence that they were reading on the link, you have said their evidence doesn't say what they claim it says, then you've made a no-link argument. Right? If their evidence that they've read on the impact scenario, you said doesn't say what they claim it says, you've made an impact answer. Right? So the beauty of their evidence doesn't say what they claim it says is you are also attacking whatever type of argument they are attempting to substantiate through the evidence just now.
Oh, sorry. So when you do that and make the indictment, would it be beneficial for you to like analyze like your own evidence and explain why it's better, or is it just like make the attack?
No, yes, absolutely. It would always, one, it would be good if you didn't fall prey to the same problem. So try to tag your evidence accurately. And two, make the distinction is their evidence doesn't say what they claim it is. Here's where our evidence is better. Yes, always comparisons like that are always super duper awesome. Okay, so those are two basics that you can use even if I didn't understand anything they said. I can say those two things. Okay? The final one is if your app case outweighs, if your neg, whatever negative argument you want to go for outweighs. Even if you lose. I had a debater who liked running warning on the affirmative as his advantage. Because he knew that even if he lost a couple of local, regional nuclear wars, he could outweigh it. Which meant he could be a little sloppy in answering some of the negative arguments, because he could drop a dissent here or there, and he was still going to outweigh because warning was a larger impact in his mind. Okay? So case outweighs, or disadd, or K, or whatever your counterclaim, whatever your negative argument is, outweighs. There's always a great sort of third argument. So those are three things that you can say even if you didn't understand anything they said. We'll talk more about cross-ex and how we try to learn about what they said. Okay, hope that helped out. So when I said learn to control your bladder, basically my point was, like, you know, come on, seriously. My time is not infinite. I am willing to judge the debate, but extending it an extra 10 minutes because you can't, you know, like cut down on your cafes. I see several people have this coffee symbol on your computer. Yeah, so obviously y'all are addicted to caffeine.
You have to know.
You can probably, I don't know, maybe eBay or Craigslist find one of those like mobile calculator things that you guys carry with you. Wear diapers. We adult diapers. That's also an item. That would help as well if you have serious issues. Just peeing around. I'm not going to know it. Right? You got your adult diaper on. It's working for you. Okay. Any questions about prep time? Cool. Number 3 is cross-examination, but I want to take a break right here. I want to take a 5-minute break. There's a chance for you to build up on Great, that you're going to need to pee out in about 45 minutes. Yes. Run around. If you're feeling a little sleepy, do some jumping jacks. This, that, and the other. It is currently 10:08 at 10:13. Let's get back in here and work on process.
Didn't want to.
You're fine.
Okay, I wanted to separate out Cos-X and focus on this. It is a huge part of debate for a lot of reasons. What I'm going to focus on in teaching a modified version of the Cos-X lecture is the speaker point part of it, how to conduct yourself in cross-examination so as to improve your speaker points. For those of you who've done debate before, who've been in debate rounds, you have probably noticed that there is a difference in the rate of delivery between speeches and cross-examination. Most speeches tend to be a high rate of delivery in terms of speed. Cross-examination tends not to be that. And it's sort of interesting why isn't that the case? Like, why don't we talk fast in Cos-X? Is a legitimate question, it seems. The reason why we talk fast, and can anyone answer the question why we talk fast? Why do we talk fast? Todd?
Arguments per minute.
Yes.
That's where you get at the arguments and matter.
Yeah.
That's where we're going to get more drop on the speeches.
Deontay, what would you add to that?
I would say the reason why I do it is because I want to throw the other person off, the other opponent off.
Okay.
It's not throwing my partner, because they have the evidence that I have on those.
When I'm talking to people who've never seen the debate before, and they're seen the debate for the first time, they are the Cos-X are fast. What I tell them is, think of debate as a competition in which each team is attempting to build a puzzle, put a puzzle together, and that each of the pieces of evidence are puzzle pieces. And at the end of the debate, the judge is going to determine which picture, which puzzle has a clearer picture, which one can they see more of. And so the more evidence you can introduce in the debate, or as Todd mentioned, the more arguments you can introduce into the debate, the more coherent your picture and your puzzle is going to be. And inevitably, and this is not just debate, inevitably, if you give someone a limited amount of time to speak, and they have a motivation to provide as much information as possible, they're going to talk fast. Right? Imagine that your parent walks into your room, and it is 10:45 at night, and you're talking on the phone. And they say, okay, you've only got 5 more minutes on the phone, and you have to hang up. If they tell you that, I guarantee the next 5 minutes will be faster than the previous 10 minutes that you were talking. You've been given a time limit. You want to present more information. So that's why we talk fast. And Deontay provided another strategic reason, which is if I talk fast, I might be able to confuse my opponent or say more things than they can comprehend. Where is the danger in that? Bingo. Arjun points out the problem is it is very smart to try to confuse your opponent if you're not confusing the judge. It is very smart and strategic to try to present more arguments than your opponent can handle, if the judge can handle it. If the judge cannot handle them, it is no longer smart to try to confuse your opponent or present more arguments than they can handle, because you're now doing something that is hurting your ability to persuade the judge. Why do we talk slow in Cos-X? Why do we talk fast in Cos-X? Don't those exact same time limits apply? Aren't we also trying to present information? Why do we not talk fast? Yes, Tom.
Put holes in the arguments and the way that the defense turns each other. So by doing so, by making it clear to the judge, it shows that they have no understanding of what they're talking about. Now you have a clear knowledge, so it's an ethos thing. So I have more knowledge than you do.
And you can't do that fast?
No, if you're trying to sway the judge, it'd be better and more clear, and it'd look a lot better to present yourself as someone talking slow, like, I got this.
Yes, absolutely. I would apply that same logic to your speeches.
However, we might talk so slow for a long because you don't want him to ask you too many questions in the process.
That's if you're answering. Deontay is saying that you want to talk slow because if they've got a limited amount of time to ask you questions, and so you can delay and be evasive, things like that. That's true. I would say that Ty's point is well stated about ethos, and that should apply to your speeches as well. Right? What I tell debaters, and there's nothing more annoying to me than having a debater scream at me really, really fast for 6 minutes in an 8-minute speech. Right? They read their 1AC, and they're just blistering through it. okay, I'm done. Now look at my timer, there's 2.5 minutes left. Why were you talking so fast? It's totally unnecessary to talk fast. If you only got 5 minutes of argument and you have an 8-minute speech, you don't need to talk fast. Okay? Okay, just want to throw that out there as a footnote. Ty is exactly right. Ethos is more easily accomplished if you are calm and collected and talking at a slower rate to punctuate, emphasize your points. That's why we do it in cross-examination. You might want to try doing this speech once in a while. Okay, let's talk about cross-ex. I've got an A through E. Rule A. Face the person you're trying to convince.
Good job.
Thank you. This happens a lot when you're judging novice debates. Hopefully it doesn't happen as much when you're judging varsity debates, but it still happens. Yes, I'm asking a question of my opponent. And yes, I want to reference my opponent. But ultimately, I'm trying to convince the judge. This is really important to always keep in mind. Your opponent always thinks you're wrong. At the end of the round, if your debate career required you to convince your opponent, you would not have a very good record. Because even if you sound really good and you're really persuasive, in the end, your opponent thinks you're losing. Stop trying to convince them. Convince the judge. Eye contact with the judge as much as possible. Later on, we're going to talk about space, and I'm going to talk about the persuasive triangle of spatiality. Right? Understanding there are three parts of the debate. There's your opponent, yourself, and the judge. You want to position yourself where you always have them within eye contact. For the purpose of cross-examination, face the judge, focus on the judge. That's little A. Little B, fail to plan to fail. Fail to plan to fail. You should have an idea of what you want to accomplish in cross-examination. Now, I am aware of inexperienced debaters who the goal they want to accomplish in cross-examination is they want to survive. They want to make it through the next 3 minutes without fainting, or without puking, or without giving up. And I have some sympathy for them. But if you're an experienced debater, to be honest, if you're a debater who spent money to come to a debate camp, your goal should be a little loftier than I don't want to bomb. Okay? Have an idea of what you want to accomplish. What are we trying to get at? What do we want to do? Let me tell you what you're not going to accomplish, for the most part. I'm not saying it's never happened before, but it should not be your goal. Your goal in cross-examination should not be to get the other team to say, you know, you're right. That's not a good goal. No, because a good team's not going to do that. Right? I had a debater who I was coached, and I hated coaching him before the round because he would always just say something like this. He's like, well, what do we make this argument? Argument doesn't make any sense. And his response would be, yeah, but this team is dumb. And I'd say, why am I coaching you for a team that's dumb? If they're so dumb that you can beat them with that argument, why are we wasting time? So yes, there are teams that are so bad at debate that you can convince them in cross-examination to say, you know, you're right. But we're not going to waste our time working and prepping for teams like that, because those aren't the teams that you have to beat to be a successful debate. The teams you have to beat are the ones who they're going to dig their heels in, and they're not going to admit you're right. So our goal is not to get them to say, you know, you're right. That's not our goal. We should have a little bit more strategic goal in mind. Right? Cross-examination will want to see, what do we want to figure out? How about this? Here's an example which you might not have followed. How many of you have debated an affirmative case that had more than one advantage? Okay? How many of you have debated a case that had more than one advantage with different impact scenarios? Advantage 1 was nuclear war. Advantage 2 was human rights. Advantage 3 was environmental sustainability or biodiversity. Cross-ex question number 1. Which of these impacts is more important? How about that? What if we just ask the other team to prioritize their impacts? In this debate, the affirmative has said that a nuclear war causes extinction. And they've said that human rights leads to the destruction of freedom, which is an a priori issue. A priori is just a fancy way of saying it matters the most. And so you ask them in cross-examination, okay, so which one's more important? If we had to choose between avoiding nuclear extinction or avoiding the loss of human freedom, which one would we choose? If their response to that is, it's impossible to choose, then your next follow-up is, okay, so if I turn the advantage on human rights, you have then proven to me with your concession and cross-examination, you can't say nuclear war outweighs. I just asked you a question that said which one's more important. You had an opportunity to say nuclear extinction. So later on, when I win that you make human rights worse, you aren't going to be able to say nuclear war extinction outweighs, right? Right? That's just an easy cross-section right there. That shows the judge that you're actually thinking about debate. Not thinking about, they said black, I'll say right. They say yes, I'll say no. They say tall, I'll say short. Right? That's bad debate. Bad debate is, I'm just going to say the opposite of what my opponent has said. Smart debate is, I'm going to listen to what they said and ask myself, does that make sense? B, fail to plan, plan to fail. Little c, a typology of questions. Let's talk about the different types of questions that we want to ask in cross-examination. Question type number 1. So this would be 3, cross-examination, C, typology, little 1. These are questions of clarification. Questions of clarification. I don't know what that means. Questions. You said hermeneutics. Who is this Unix person that you're speaking of? Herman. Right? What does that mean? You said political capital. Is that Washington, D.C.? That's a political capital, isn't it? What is the political capital of Venezuela?
Caracas.
What? No, I'm asking you, what's the capital of Venezuela? There you go. Okay. So asking a clarification question is completely legitimate. Too many debaters make the mistake of thinking, oh, I don't want to sound dumb, I don't want to ask. There are so many times in debate when I'm judging debate where I don't understand what that means. I haven't done research on this. I have no idea what your particular critical philosopher says when they say Dasein. What is Dasein? I have no idea what that means. Right? Feel free to ask clarification questions. Clarification questions also are sometimes asked when it's not that I didn't understand what hermeneutics means. I didn't understand when you said hermeneutic. I'm sorry, what was that? I said hermeneutics. Yes, Tom?
Is there like a strategical way to make these clarification questions sound like you're presenting yourself as someone who doesn't necessarily not know what they're talking about, but
Absolutely.
trying to make it sound strategic?
Yeah. Here's a way to do that. Is rather than saying, you said hermeneutics, what does that word mean? That's like my little Carrollton style cross-examination. Instead, you can say, when using the term hermeneutics in this debate, what is your author talking about in the context of our argument?
Okay.
Right.
So how does it it'd be more of a generalization of how does your evidence apply to our argument? Or how does your argument?
Yes, in this particular case, we want to know what a term means. We ask, what does hermeneutics mean in the context of our argument? Okay. Right? Yeah. And that's also a smart way to force them to think about the application. It forces them to sort of spell out the link argument. Link simply being a causal relationship between what they're talking about and what you're talking about. So questions of clarification. The second type of question of clarification I was just referencing there was, they said something and I didn't understand what they said because they were talking too fast. Or, it's not that they were talking too fast, it's that they were all mumbling now. They just weren't clear. Question that I have for you is, did you notice whether the judge understood? You need to be paying attention to the judge. Right? We're going to talk about this later when we talk about space. But you don't have to ask that question. If during a debate, the speaker that you are about to cross-examine, when your time is up, is talking, and you're paying attention to the judge, and that speaker is just rattling off a bunch of nonsense because nobody can understand them because it sounds like they have marbles in their mouth. They're talking really fast. They're not really saying anything, they're just making sounds. Blah, 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 blah. Watch the judge. If the judge is giving the dog face, right, the dog face being the right, the term of the head that goes, what? Right, whiskey tango pop stuff. What's going on here? Right? That's when you need to recognize, hold on, I'm not the only person around who doesn't understand what's being said. The judge doesn't get this either. The judge and I are on the same page. Don't waste cross-ex time asking about that. Instead, in your next speech, reference, Judge, you know that you didn't get that. Strike that argument. You don't have to count that argument. We didn't understand what was being said. They were being unclear. Right? If you're paying attention to the round and talking about what you know the judge is thinking, watch the judge. The cross-examination, a question of clarification. However, what if the judge was a poker face, or they were given the head nod, ooh, yeah, that mother stuff is making good sense to me, I know what's going on here. Then you need to ask in cross-examination, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the third argument that you stated. I don't need to explain, I just need to literally know what you said. Notice how that cross-ex question went down. We do not ask cross-ex questions though. So could you kind of summarize what you just said in that 8 minutes? Could you just say that again? I got 2 minutes here, and I'm going to give you a chance to extend your argument for another 2 minutes. And we don't ask open-ended questions like that. Instead, could you tell me what your third argument is? Now, I don't need to explain literally what did you say. That's how we ask the question. Yes, ma'am.
If you're, you might be answering this later, but if you happen to, like, at that time, like, maybe during your speech, or maybe during your speech, you just kind of like, I don't know, we're being strategic and not thinking of questions, and like, on the spot, you just can't think of any strategical questions. Is there any way to specifically make an open-ended question that doesn't specifically sound open-ended,
Yeah.
but also kind of like kills a little bit of time so you can think of something?
Absolutely. One thing to keep in mind is when we make arguments in a debate, they are merely building blocks that are stepping stones to get us to the ballot. So you can always ask a question about how does that building block get you to the ballot? That is an open-ended question, but isn't asked in an open-ended way. So I need some time to figure out what's going on about your app before I ask the question. And so my question is, why vote app? Right, why vote app? You just gave an 8-minute speech. Why does that mean you win? That's an open-ended question, but it gets to the point of why does that mean you're attached to the ballot? Same thing, you heard the one in C. You want to ask some questions about your counterclaim, but really, what's going on? So instead, I'm going to ask this topicality question and say, hold on, why does that limits argument mean you win the debate? Right. In other words, pick something out, ask why it gets them a voting issue, and that gives you time to collect your thoughts about what's going on. And those are open-ended questions that are not so open-ended that you just get to prattle on. It forces them to attach their argument to the ballot. That's always a good way to force the other team to explain why they win. Is never a bad delay tactic. Because a lot of times debaters don't really know why they win. They're just doing things that their other varsity team did. Well, our other team did it and they won that debate, so we're going to do it too. Right? Forcing them to answer those questions. The second type of cross-ex question is extending the logic. Extending the logic. I sort of just explained this with why does that mean you win type stuff, but it doesn't have to just be why you mean you win. It could be okay, you've read a piece of evidence that said that, you've read an argument that says that by doing our plan with engaging Cuba over oil offshore drilling, that we upset China. Now, is it your claim that upsetting China will lead to a war between the U.S. and China? Yes, it is. Okay, extending that logic, so is it your claim then that when China perceives that their sphere of influence has been encroached, they are likely to lash out? Right? In other words, what we're trying to do there is create space for non-uniques. Everyone know what I'm saying when I say non-unique? Right? You're on the app, you're saying you're going to create a world in which Cuba offshore drilling is receiving investment from the United States. They've got a disadvantage that says that freaks China out. We want to point out to the judge that, hold on, if that's going to freak China out, there's some other stuff that also will freak China out. But what we have to do first is get the negative team to talk about their argument, not in the specific case of Cuba oil upsetting China, but in engagement upsetting China, U.S. action in Latin America upsetting China. We want to extend the logic to create space for non-uniques. Same thing when we're negative. We want to talk about how the affirmative has linked to our disadvantage. We extend the logic of it. So your claim is that the U.S. needs to invest in offshore drilling in Cuba. Why is that? Is Cuba looking to invest itself? Is Cuba looking for partners? Is Cuba going to do this no matter what? Right? We're extending the logic of what the affirmative says to create space for the links to our disadvantages. So that's a second type of question. A third type of question. And these are where the majority of good cross-exes occur. Setting up an argument. Setting up an argument. This is where we need to ask questions that are not so much focused on what the other team did say, but what we needed them to say. There are two versions of type of question.
So, when you ask these setup questions, because I have difficulties with this, so is it more like these questions? I feel like are more predicated on the knowledge that you have of the arguments they're reading. So it's more of a I need to learn their evidence, and then type of question.
Yeah, and also, I'll give you an example. I'll say there's two ways to achieve this. One is the pit of doom, which is, the pit of doom is our negative argument. And we want to push them toward our pit of doom. Right? So we're essentially asking questions. For example, no affirmative this year is likely to read a piece of evidence in the 1AC or to mention in the plan how much their affirmative cost. And yet, when I asked you about a disadvantage, one of the first answers was spending. Well, how are we going to read a spending disadvantage if the 1AC didn't specify how much they cost? Cross-examination. Okay, so the plan says you substantially increase investment in offshore drilling. What does that mean? How much money are we talking about? How much are we going to invest in? Well, our authors don't specify a substantial amount enough to solve the act. Well, okay, how much is necessary? Well, the evidence doesn't say how much is necessary. Does that mean it's a blank check? Right? Those are the types of questions that we could have given. We haven't faked anybody out. It was very clear that our cross-examination is focusing on spending and cost. We are pushing them toward the bit of giving.
So if let's say you wanted to, I have like my two ends like, all right, I want you to read security, politics, China this, and China counterplan, and like spit, right? If I were gonna, or let's say that's what the 1 and 2 read. If I had to ask questions, if I had to cross-sex the 1 and C about their things, and I didn't know much about, let's say, security K or politics, would I predicate my questions more around like things I did know, and then just like, I think I phrased that right. I don't specifically know how to speak a little bit, but
That's all good.
so if I'm trying to get offense for my 15, right, and I'm asking questions towards things that I need to know, but let's say I specifically didn't know security K or things like that. When I'm predicating your questions, is it more based on what I do know?
In the case of the pit of doom strategy, where we're not fading anybody out, it's what you do know. I know we've got evidence that the amount of money we would need to invest in Cuba offshore drilling is a lot. And I'm going to force their hand on this question in cross-examination. I know where I want them to go, I'm going to push them toward. And the other type of strategy is what I call the reverse pit of doom. Right? The reverse pit of doom is where you are not alerting the other team into what you want them to answer or what you want to talk about. Instead, you're being much more deceptive. Okay? Much more deceptive. For example, in the case of, we said that one of the obvious disadvantages was China. That if we invest in Cuba, that China will get upset about that and perceive that the United States is encroaching on their sphere of influence. Okay? What if, however, you had a reverse China disadvantage? Back in the day when I debated, it replaced China with Soviet Union. And there were two types of disadvantages. One was called encirclement, and it basically run like the China that said we talked about. It said that the Soviet Union, which was an ally of Cuba, has a sphere of influence, and if the U.S. tries to get involved in there, the Soviet Union is going to freak out. But there was a different version of that that went the opposite way. It was called red spread. And it was that the Soviets are dirty communists. And if we give them an inch, they will take a mile. That we need to encircle them, because if we don't encircle them, they will encircle us. Okay? There's that same disadvantage binary, except with regard to China. Right? So it's not a question of the China disadvantage says A subpoint, increase U.S. influence in Cuba, freaks out China, B subpoint, China lash out, blah, blah, blah. Instead, it's that if the U.S. does not increase its influence in Cuba, China will use Cuba as a foothold for invasion. Right? Sort of Red Dawn. It's just the opposite of the disadvantage. Okay? Well, what if you wanted to run the reverse China, the red spread version of that disadvantage? But the team you're debating is running a case that increases investment in Cuba. How can we ask questions that might get them to think you're going to run the regular China disadvantage? They answer it in a way that gives you links to your reverse China disadvantage. Right? That's what the reverse pit of doom strategy is. A more easier way to understand that is one of the simple questions, and this is, if you don't know any other question to ask when you're negative and you're debating the affirmative, here's one that you can always ask of the 1AC. Why hasn't the affirmative been done yet? The good old inherency question. The 1AC just gave us 8 minutes of
Bless you.
OMG, this app is awesome. You are not going to believe how great this app is. This app is the best app ever. It is amazing. It solves everything. It's like the Bogart app. You buy one and you get a whole other one free. Okay? Wow, that sounds amazing. Why haven't we done this yet? This is such a cool idea. If this is such a great idea, why hasn't this occurred yet? The way the affirmatives are structured, they have to have inherency. Now, back in the day, affirmatives would spell out what those inherent barriers were, whether they be structural, attitudinal, existential. There's all sorts of inherency. We don't really talk about that anymore. Nowadays, the burden for the affirmative is it's not being done right now. But there still has to be that idea. Why is it not being done now? Right? If the app is such a great idea, why hasn't it been done yet? Process question number 1. Why hasn't the app been done yet? You'd be amazed how many affirmatives don't know how to answer that question. If their answer is, well, I don't know. Well, how do you know it's not going to be done? You don't know. Okay. So the midterms are coming up in 2014, and you don't have an argument as to why your app's not going to be done. So can we just wait until after the 2 midterms, and that way my politics decide doesn't happen? Right? Asking the app why the app hasn't been done yet is the opening question to you tell me what the dissatisfied. Right? Because that's the reason why the app hasn't been done yet. The reason why it hasn't been done yet is it costs too much. There are powerful political actors who don't like it. There are reasons that the app hasn't talked about yet, like maybe China. There are barriers to the affirmative, whether they have isolated them and explicitly stated what they are. The reverse bit of doom question is, you tell me what you said. Right? You help me get there. So, okay, so those are some typologies of questions. There are other types of questions that you can ask, but those usually fall into one of those 3 categories. Let's D-sub one. What not to ask. Here as a judge is the most annoying type of question that I have to hear today. I don't get this in college today. I only get this when I judge high school today. So it's your fault. This is the, I don't know what else to ask, so I'm going to do the, so what'd you eat for lunch question. Yeah. What'd you eat for lunch? How'd y'all get here? Did y'all take I-20 or did y'all take 75 or 50? Right? I'm going to kill 3 minutes of time by asking questions. You are killing something. My soul and your spirit are the 2 main things that are dying in this moment. Yeah.
Isn't it the process?
Yes. I get there's this notion, debaters have taken what we call speech time limits and turned them from ceilings into floors. Oh my gosh, I've got to talk for 8 minutes, even though I've only got 5 minutes of things to say. So when I get to the end of my 5 minutes, I'm going to do this one. Okay, so let me just restate some of the arguments I just stated. I'm close, I promise. I was taking this entire thing. Cross-examination, I've got a minute left. I don't know what to ask. So are you going to your prom?
Can I say objection? Objection.
Can you make an objection?
Wait, what county did you hear this question?
Yeah.
What?
I've never in my
You never in life heard it.
No.
Ty,
I've
you
heard
are a
it.
lucky person.
I've heard it.
I promise you I've heard this. I'm not making this up. I'm telling you right now, if you don't have 3 minutes of questions, it is better to sit down than to ask one of those. Now, I don't want you to sit down. I want you to have 3 minutes. There's a reason why you want to use all 3 minutes, except for the cross-examination of the 2 and C. What is true of every other cross-examination?
That's when your
Yes,
team
Tom.
gets
Yes. Your partner speaks next. And so you want to use all of that speech, all of that cross-ex time, because that's extra prep time for your partner, except for the cross-ex of the 2 and C. And even in that sense, your partner is not speaking next, but it is prep time. So there's a strategy, there's a strategic benefit to using all 3 minutes. I'm telling you right now, if the only way we can use all 3 minutes is to talk about personal stuff that the judge doesn't care about, please don't do that. Sit down. Also, never ask this type of question. So, you know you're wrong, right? I get that a lot. Right now I'm teaching some 6th graders today. Yeah, exactly. And they love to do that one. They do the, so you read this piece of evidence from the New York Times. You know that's not a credible source, right? Like, okay, one, let's set aside whether the New York Times is a credible source. The other team should never say, you know you're right, that was not credible. You just right, that's not me. Don't ask the other team if they're dumb. Don't ask the other team if they're wrong. Those are not useful questions to ask in cross-examination. E subpoint. E subpoint. Practice cross-examination like you do speeches. Practice cross-ex like you do speeches. Brianna brought up earlier that she does research before tournaments.
Yeah.
She practices her 1AC before tournaments. She's also going to practice cross-ex. If she is the 1AC or if her partner is the 1AC, whoever is, not only should they be practicing reading it, after reading that 1AC, let the entire room bombard them with questions. Right? Make them answer questions about their plan, about their advantages, about their pieces of evidence. Practice cross-ex. Whenever we write a new app, the first thing that we do after we've written it is have whoever's going to give the 1AC read it in front of everyone to make sure they can get it in 9 minutes, because that's our time. And then the next thing that happens is we all cross-ex. Not only can you read it in 9 minutes, or in your case 8 minutes, do you understand what you said? Right? Can you answer questions about it? That's practicing cross-examination. And that's what you need to do with this.
So, this is like specific to small schools. Next year I'm going into my school as the only debater left. I have to rebuild a team. Now, when, at the point where I have to bring up a novice, right, and all the other kids are novices, and they don't specifically know how to ask questions towards our case, is there any recommendation on how to teach them the case without them knowing it, and without them knowing anything about the data?
I mean, first of all, in that situation, Tom, my recommendation would be start by teaching them the way your teachers teach you in classes, right? Have notes that you give them.
Okay, so
But,
just like give them the general knowledge.
yes, but as soon as you've done that, there is no better way to learn to do debate than debate. It's ugly, it is frustrating, it taxes you. But there's only one way to do debate, and that's to do it. Right? It's like trying to teach someone to ride a bicycle without having a bicycle in the room. Well, okay, you're going to put your feet on the pedals, lower pedals. And you're going to press forward, but not too fast. And you got to get your balance. Like, there's no way to describe to someone how to ride a bike. What you do is you put them on the bike, and you say, your knees are going to get straight. Right? That's how you do debate. You hand someone a document, and you say, your knees are going to get straight. You know? So that's sadly how it's going to have to work. But a combination, I think initially, give them information and let them know. Debate has a bunch of weird stuff going on, but in the end, it's about information that we gather from the real world. Right? This evidence exists out there. There are scholars who are debating these issues. But we're going to muck it up with a bunch of weird rules and jargon. But the bottom line is, people are talking about crude oil investments like here. Let's read that article. Have you read the original sources. A lot of times, novices or inexperienced players, not only novices, even varsity people, hand them a bunch of evidence, and all they have are a paragraph from a book. No, let's read the article. Let's read that chapter together, and then they learn why that piece of evidence matters, the context in which it came together.
I have the same problem because I need to know how to compete people with that. When I do it, they believe like they don't like debate.
I said debate has to be fun. So part of it is finding people who might be interested in doing debate, making it fun for you. My suggestion would be, back in the day, back in the olden times, debate was part of a larger activity called forensics. And so it was very much related to theater and individual events like original oratory, which you might be familiar with, or dramatic interpretation. Find people who don't mind getting up and talking in front of others. And or find people who, flip side, they're not really interested in getting up and talking in front of people, but they love reading a book. Right? My first piece of advice to debaters, to students, is read a book. That is my number one piece of advice I give to my debaters. We talk about something like, have you read a book? Try reading a book. You learn. Right? There are people at your school who are smart, but aren't really interested in getting up and talking in front of people. The beauty of debate is, especially now with all computers, it doesn't really seem like you're getting up and talking in front of people. It seems like you're talking with a computer. So, yeah, that's the problem, but we can convince them better. But eventually, the way, back in the old times, the reason why families had 12 children was because they had large farms that they had to take care of, and they were expecting 3 of those kids to die. Right? Yeah. So they didn't need 12 kids, they only needed about 8. But in order to get 8 kids, they had to have 12. Right? So I'm telling you, if you need a debate team, don't look for one partner. That's all you need to have a debate team, just one partner. Try to find 3 more people.
No, we don't have one person, like, we have like a whole team, like 12 of us.
Awesome.
And then all these they graduate, so I need to
I understand, I'm saying the next 12 that you need to get, be thinking that I want to bring a bunch in because you don't know who the victims are. Right? So, okay. Cross-examination, practice. Any questions about cross-ex? I want to move on to Roman numeral number 3. Speaking better. So on my lecture about how to get better speaker points, it took me to get to Roman numeral 3 for speaking better. Because there's a lot of stuff else that goes into it. A subpoint, space. A subpoint, space. Little 1. Stand if you can. If you're physically capable of standing up, you should. 1, sort of like that fashion thing. There are some old fuddy-duddy judges who just kind of want you to stand. 2, and actually more importantly, from a ergonomic standpoint or perspective, if you stand up, your torso is going to be in a better position for your diaphragm and your lungs to push air across your vocal cords for a longer period of time. When you're seated, you tend to be scrunched over. This can also be true if you stand up and you don't have your computer raised or wherever your documents are raised high enough. If you're crunched over like this, if you ever how many of you have ever been to a musical concert, or how many of you are in chorus? Anybody got any choral people out there? I was in chorus as well. Okay. Chorus people don't do this. You don't see choral people singing like this. Hey, I'm gonna be yay! Right? That's not how you do it. Why? Because we got to be able to breathe. Standing erect. You want to make sure that we can breathe properly. So stand if you can. Also, it projects your voice. If you are raised up, even those of you who are short, your voice is going to project farther across the room. A lot of judges are in the back. That's where the electricity is. 2, I've already mentioned this, the triangle of persuasive spatiality. The triangle of persuasive spatiality. You want to position yourself in the debate room so that at all times you can view the judge and your opponent. I've already given you an example of why you want to be able to view the judge. During the debate, you need to know what your judge is talking about, whether they're paying attention to you, whether they're chatting on Facebook. Watching them lets you know that. Just like I know how many people are paying attention to my lecture right now because I'm watching you.
Good question. So how do you take that and use it to your advantage?
Here's try this. If I cared about whether or not you're listening to me, I can say, hey, you, stop. You don't need to use your mouth to listen to what I'm saying right now. I'm just going to give you any notes. Right? If your judge is doing something that you think is not paying attention to you, say their name. Right? Their name's on the ballot. Their name's on the area. It comes out. Mr. or Mrs., Mr. or Miss, Doctor, whatever you want to call them. Don't say judge. But if necessary, right? When I teach public speaking, I say one of the ways to gain the attention and interest of the audience is to startle them. Now, that's not a great way to keep their attention because you have to keep the energy high. But in the moment, if you want to get someone's attention, do something to start with this. Well, here's the question. The ultimate decision you have to make is, am I going to lose this round if you're not listening to my speech? Am I willing to test out the possibility that, yeah, I might upset them, but in the end, I might scare them?
What if you do it like this?
Absolutely. You can also stay in the name.
That sounds like you're happy.
Those are inefficient because you're not actually, while you're speaking during your speech, if you say to the judge, for example, if the judge's last name is Johnson, okay, and it's a woman, her name is Claire Johnson, but you don't know her first name is Claire. So when you're talking about something and you're worried that Claire is not paying attention, you're like, Miss Johnson, this is what I mean when I say we're winning this disadvantage. If you say someone's name for that brief moment, they're going to pay attention to you and probably get caught and understand that, all right, I'm supposed to be paying attention to you. Right? But what I wanted to focus on was not so much the judge, because hopefully the judge will be paying attention. Here's why it's important with triangle of spatiality to always have your opponent in view, because they're not always paying attention. I had a debate team this past year, a very successful debate team, very successful, one of the top 7 or 8 teams in the country, and lost the debate because they were talking to each other during the 1NR. The 1NR made an argument that they weren't catching because they were talking to each other. The 1AR didn't answer. The 2NR extended that argument. The judge voted on that argument. Okay? Now, I'm not saying the other team made that argument simply because my 2 debaters were talking to each other. I'm telling you, when I debated, I paid attention to the other team And if at any point I thought they weren't listening to my speech because they were reaching for a file or talking to their partner, I started making new arguments. So if I was answering topicality, or let's say I was answering a disadvantage, I'd already answered topicality with 2AC, and I could tell that the other team was no longer listening to me because they weren't going to go for that disad, and so they started following stuff, I would start making topicality answers on my DA plan, right? If I was answering a counter plan, I would slip in a critique answer. Because I was going to catch them not paying attention and punish them. They were going to lose the round if they didn't listen to every second of my speech, yes.
Won't the judge get confused though?
Well, a judge will get confused in the sense of why are they putting this there, but as a judge, I'm basically a stenographer, right? I'm not having to pull files. I'm not really thinking about what y'all are saying. I'm just taking notes. And yeah, I'll be confused in the moment, but later on when it's explained to me that, oh, the reason why you did that is you explained to me they weren't paying attention, you're right, they didn't answer that. Oh, that's funny, I'm going to vote on this. This is an easy way for me to get out of here if we can go to lunch. Right? Yes.
So how do you do that? Like, so how do you
Simply watch the other team, and if you don't think they're paying attention, you don't have, that was an extra tricky way that I was doing it. Don't make a different topicality answer on the DA floor. Make a disad answer. Say the case outweighs and provide a blank. The argument that you want to make is something that's a silver bullet. And by a silver bullet, what I mean by that is, it does something that is guaranteed to win even if you're losing other things. Right? So a voting issue argument. Make sure there's an impacted claim made. And then use it against them later on. It could be anything. Right? It could be a permutation on a counterplan or a K. Right? Those are silver bullets. Cool. Permutation due to counterplan. Permutation due to chaos. Those are quick and easy that people are used to. Okay, number 3, keep your eyes on the prize in terms of space, which is understand why you've chosen the place that you live. Right? You walk into a room. Let's talk about this room right here. The hearing comes out and you're debating this room. You get to the room first. Where do you choose to sit and why?
The best place.
What's your name?
Flora.
Flora? Why did you pick the table?
Because it's like the best space.
What makes it the best space?
It's the biggest and it's like the entire room.
Okay, it's a flat space to spread my stuff out. It has 2 chairs that are movable. Okay? So that seems pretty good. Over here, yeah, I'm a little bit higher up, and this chair is cool because it swivels, and neither of those chairs swivels, but there's only one of them. There's not another chair, and there's not really a place to put my stuff. There is electric outlets here, right? That's how you need to be thinking about space, the spatiality. Where does the judge come in? Right?
In the back.
Put it, how about this? You walk into this room, and the only thing in this room is this table.
Take it.
Okay. Absolutely. How do you know to get to this room first? What are you going to do? Parents come out, one of you needs to go to the room immediately. Right? Go to the room. Hanging out and chatting with your friends is not the thing to be doing. Get somebody to the room. Be subpoint. Voice. Number 1, speed. The A subpoint. Efficiency is velocity. The A subpoint is efficiency is velocity. How many of you drive a car? Enough of you that maybe answer the question? Okay. The question I have for you is, what is RPM? You know what RPM is? Revolutions per minute. What does it refer to when it says revolution?
Like how many
No, it's not talking about your tires, it's talking about the engine. The engine turns over. The engine turns over. How many of you know how to drive a stick? You know what that is?
Yes.
I know what it is. I know you do anything. Your Honor, you've driven a stick before?
Yeah, it's all down on me, but whatever.
Driving
Yes,
a
ma'am.
is so hard.
It is
It
very
is
difficult.
so complicated.
Okay, so you've done it. What's your name? What's your name?
Sam.
Sam?
Crazy. Sam.
You've driven a stick before?
Yeah.
Okay, have you had it in neutral and pushed on the accelerator?
I have.
What doesn't work?
Wait, it won't go forward. You have to like balance the clutch
Yeah.
and the gas, and you have to
Absolutely.
find like that central balance point.
Uh-huh.
It's impossible.
Yeah. If you have a manual transmission in neutral and you press on the accelerator, the car does not move forward, but the engine does rev. It revs, the engine is turning. Right? That's what talking fast in a debate is like if we can't understand you. Right? Talking fast in a debate where the judge can't understand you is no different than driving a manual transmission and pushing the accelerator when you have it in neutral. You're not going anywhere. You're not making progress. You're just doing damage to your engine. It's not about words per minute. It's about judge understood arguments per minute. Efficiency is velocity. It doesn't matter how fast you're talking. Does the judge understand what you're saying? That's little a. Little b, hearing is not the same as understanding. Hearing is not the same as understanding. I am taking notes in the debate. I heard you say hermeneutics, or Dasein, or deontology. That doesn't mean, it's not deontology. That doesn't mean I understand it. I heard it. I wrote something down. The key to speed is knowing when to make pauses, dramatic pauses, used for emphasis. As a signal to the judge, this matters. Can be way more effective than blistering through a speech in which everything is monotone. Little C, yes, Tom?
Do you have like, so I've met and done this myself, like issues with breathing, right? So let's say like in the middle of a speech, I'm like blah, 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 blah. And then like in the middle of a word, I'll just breathe because I don't have a specific, let's say, rhythm, I guess, to where I should breathe. Is there like a specific spot that you recommend that I breathe, like a space or the period of the sentence?
It'd be great if you could make it through the sentence. In general, what you want to do, and the reason why you practice, here's a breathing exercise that I do. And I got this from the chorus, which was inhale for a count of 4, hold for a count of 8, exhale for a count of 8. Inhale for a count of 4. Make sure that on that count of 8, you're pushing as much breath as you did on that count of 1. Change that. Inhale for 4, hold for 16, exhale for 16. Inhale for 4, hold for 32, exhale for 32.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Keep that first inhalation short, because the idea is I need to be able to take in a lot of breath in a short amount of time. But you want to hold it and extend it over an extended amount of time, because that's what reading is all about.
But let's say like, I either for the sake of laziness or just I just generally, I guess I don't know. Let's say like I'm a lazy speaker.
You are a lazy speaker.
Right, and I don't necessarily practice breathing techniques, but I practice speaking itself.
Yeah, that's good.
But when I do speak, like there's times where I'll double breathe or just like over breathe or something. Is there like a space if I don't practice breathing drills? Like if I
Yeah, what I was going to say was, in general, what you're taught in Nate is, if you could, you want to be able to take a breath that gets you through the tag and the sight, and then a breath between the sight and the card is not a bad thing to do, because the judge can then distinguish the sight from the piece of evidence. Right? The hope is that you can make it through that entire piece of evidence without taking another breath. That might not be possible, and that's where I said maybe you can make it to the end of the sentence. But for now, try doing a breath for the tag and the sight, and then a breath for the card. Work on that. Little C, start 2 clicks slower than your top speed.
Especially on topicality.
In general. The 1AC, keep in mind, voices you are familiar with, you understand better. If you've never heard someone before and they're talking to you for the first time, it is going to be harder for you to understand them than if they're good friends with you and you've heard their voice many, many times. Well, most people I judge, I haven't heard that many times before. If you'll start just a little bit slower for your 1AC, your 1NC, your 2NC, just for the first 5 to 10 seconds, and then move into your top speed, I'm much more likely to understand that top speed than if the first thing out of your mouth, right? Start just a little bit slower. And that's a nice segue into number 2, volume. How many of you are familiar with, there's an old SNL skit, Jacob Silge, which was Will Ferrell, you know, voice and modulation. Right? The joke in Jacob Silge's example was that he always talked like this, he was always talking loud, he couldn't be quiet, even when he was trying to whisper. The joke is that's debaters. Debaters suffer from voice modulation. Not everything should be high intensity. Not everything should be as loud as possible. If you're a loud talker, that's great. You're going to be able to project your voice. If you're a loud talker, when you get quiet, that's when I think, oh, crap, got me there. Right? Emphasis is happening now. On the other hand, if you're usually a soft talker, when you get loud, that's when I think, oh, this is good. This is important. It's the variation is what brings emphasis, not volume. I refer to this as the debater who cried decision rule. If every argument is the most important argument, then none of them are important. Right? If every impact is the most important impact in the round, then none of them are important. There has to be some variation in substance as well. With regards to volume, expression as persuasion. The next little B is how loud is too loud. And that's simply where I'll say, pay attention to the judge. Can the judge understand what you're saying? That's loud enough. If the judge is giving you the sort of, whoa, this is especially true. I've had debaters that like to get all up on top of me. If I'm judging and they're sitting at the table and you're the judge, can I get my speech right here? It's okay if I get my, no, it's not okay. You're invading my personal space. All I need to be able to do is hear you. I don't need to smell you. Okay? Debate is not a scratch and sniff activity. Okay? Number 3, consistency. Little A, you want to avoid giving off the anxiety vibe. This is difficult because you want to win, I understand that. But some of y'all, you're kind of antsy. At this point, you've had 2 Red Bulls and a 5-hour energy drink and 3 Pixie Sticks, and I realize you need a lot of energy, and you've got your, Beats by Dre headphones on, and you're rocking your music, and now you're kind of jumping around, and the debate hasn't started yet, and you look like you need to pee, and what's going on? It's unclear to me if you want to win, or if you just have some sort of nervous tick, or perhaps you're about to go psycho on me, right? Stabbing me in one or 2 pencils. So don't give off the anxiety vibe. If you seem desperate, I assume you're losing. There's a fine line between wants to win and doesn't think they're winning. Little B. How many of you watch The Simpsons? Anybody watch The Simpsons?
Oh, The Simpsons.
Real quick question.
Like the cartoon.
Yes, Todd.
And see, like, is there, I guess, it's just a body type thing, but like, when I debate, I tend to like shake my legs, like,
Yeah, I like
Yes,
shake my
you-
leg, my partner's like, stop.
but like, it's like, no, not like loud, obnoxious, like, literally just like, it looks like my leg is having a seizure.
Yeah.
It's really fast shaking, like, quick pace. But is there like a distinction to a judge, or is like,
There is a distinction to a judge. I'm not going to notice that unless the volume of it is distracting from your speech. Like I've had debaters that did this while they were, it's like to create a rhythm or something. I'm like, that is distracting. I'm trying to listen to what they're saying now and flow back. Unless you're SOS. It's like, what's the secret? Dis ad, outweighs case.
but like, because when I do it, like, I'll sit, like, look all intense and stuff.
Yeah.
But I've met debaters that, like, is there a way to, like, let's say my nervous tick to a judge looks like, man, I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but in all reality, I'm just like, man, this is
In,
like,
in the particular example that you're giving, I don't think you have to worry about that. I'm not going to pay a whole lot of attention to the lower torso, like the lower the waist. If it's something that you're worried the judge might, then find a way to say something about it during the debate. You know, would be my suggestion. In that instance, laugh it off during cross-examination. If they ask you a cross-ex question, And you can sort of preface it with, yeah, I know when you saw my leg shaking like that, you thought that I was going to lose an argument. No, it's just a nervous tick, something like that. So find someone to deal with it. But in this, the example you gave, I don't think you ever have to worry about that. Yeah, not a concern. The reason why I started Simpsons, there's an episode of The Simpsons that you should Google, those of you that are online now, YouTube. You can YouTube put Scream a Pillow. Okay?
Scream a Pillow?
Yep, Scream a Pillow. It's like Caterpillar except with scream and then a pillow. Do this during lunch. Debaters, about 7 times, you can do it now if you want to, it's fine. Right, so you just open up a browser. One of your Facebook friends might have done it, I doubt it. Open up a browser and YouTube Scream a Pillow, and about 7 times out of 10, that's what y'all sound like to me. It's just like a loud, the beautiful literary phrase is sound and fury signifying nothing. And that's exactly what I get from debaters. You're loud, there's a lot of thrashing, as if you're drowning except there's no water, and screaming at me, as if, you are a screamer pillar. Yes, you know what I mean? Yeah, I can't help too much now. I don't know what to tell you. At some point, you gotta make choices. So, just like I said, Google it later. That's what y'all sound like. And so the question I have for you is: are you going to convince the judge that that's what you sound like? One way you can think about this entire lecture is the golden rule of debate. Debate before others as you would have them debate before you. Right? How would you want someone to sound in front of you? Would you want them to be calm, cool, and collected? Would you want to understand the words they say? Would you want to be able to comprehend their arguments? Would you want them to be witty? Or would you want them to scream at you and yell at the other team and cuss a lot and throw things? I promise you, you'll want the former, not the latter. Okay? So getting off the anxiety vibe, sound like a screamer pillar, those are problems. Let's talk about CISA point structure. Number 1, labeling positions. Little a, the difference between a subpoint definition and topicality USFG. The latter is what you should be introducing your topicality argument with, not the former. Give each off-case position a label. If you're the one in C, you should start with not a subpoint, but with next off China descent, a subpoint. Not next off a subpoint. Okay? Give each position a title. I promise you, the 2 seconds it takes you to say topicality USFG is much, much more valuable than what you think you were going to use that 2 seconds for, which was nothing. It was blasphemy. You're going to sound like an idiot. The reason why you do this, label positions, is B subpoint. Cueing the audience helps them follow you. It improves audience comprehension if they know what's coming next. As a judge, when I hear next off topicality USFG, in my mind, I understand what I'm about to hear. So when you're a little less than clear, I still get it. If the first thing I hear is a subpoint definition, I'm like, okay, I think this is probably topicality. To be honest, as a judge, when I hear a subpoint definition, that's not what I write down. I don't write down a subpoint. I write down up here, T, question mark. I think it's topicality. Probably going to be topicality. Why would they give me the definition? I don't know. Right? So you already have got me doing things I don't want to be doing, which is putting words in your mouth. 2 is, you have me doing work for you. That's not a good way to improve your speaker point. And 3rd, you somewhat confuse me. Is this or is this not topicality? It's very easy to let your judge know what's coming next. Finally, the psychology of meeting expectation. This is the little C on your labeling. The reason why you label positions is not just to increase audience comprehension, but you will improve your speaker points if the judge thinks you are doing what you told the judge you were going to do. This happens in public speaking. It's the reason why you outline your main points before you get to the body of your speech. When you let the audience know, today class I'm going to talk about 3 major things, 1, 2, and 3. And then you talk about those things, 1, 2, and 3. In the minds of the audience, they're like, they met my expectation. They said they were going to talk about 3 things, they talked about 3 things. No matter what the content was, you have satisfied the audience's expectation that you created. Right? The secret to being an effective public speaker, other than don't study make eye contact, is tell the audience what you're going to talk about it, and remind the audience that you were going to talk about it. That's it. It's very simple. Debate is no different. Tell the judge what you're going to talk about, label your position, and then talk about it, and you will create satisfaction in the judge's mind of, oh, they satisfied that question. They said they were going to be talking about the USFG, and by God, they did. Wow, look at them debate. Okay. Number 2, number your arguments. If possible, in the 2AC, number your arguments. Use your fingers while you're talking. First, second, third, fourth, if you have a hard time keeping up. Here's why. Again, as a judge, even if you're not numbering, I'm numbering for you. Because I'm going to use that structure later. That's how I'm flowing the debate. So the first thing that I hear the 2AC say, right, I'm doing this. I'm writing them down in numbers. I'm putting structure to your arguments whether you are or not. The reason why you should do it as the 2AC is that's how the 1AR should be extending the argument. Next up, the disset extend 2AC number 1 group of negative arguments. That's how 1AR should sound. Reference 2AC structure. But what if there's not 2AC structure? Then what do I have to do? I have to repeat way more. Rather than say 2AC1, extend across the 2AC's non-unique argument, group of negative arguments. Right? Less efficient. You want your 1AR to be efficient. Number 3, referencing prior arguments. Easy segue. A subpoint, the 2AC should use numbers, because B subpoint, the 1AR can use the 2AC structure. Referencing prior arguments is a great way to let the judge know where you're at. I'm now going to answer their non-uniqueness arguments. In the 2NR and the 2AR, referencing earlier arguments. Not just fouling random things which sound new. Referencing the 2MC, evidence. Referencing 2AC impact claims. Come up with catchphrases. Okay, final portion. This is Roman numeral number 4. Debate like a judge. A subpoint, choices. I'm going to give you 3 types of choices you should be doing in every debate. There was a national championship coach for Northwestern, Scott Dethridge, who gave a long lecture each year about how debate is nothing but choice. Debate's not choice. 3 types of choices. Number 1, concessions. I told you earlier in cross-examination, it's not about convincing the other team to say, yeah, you're right. You want to improve your speaker points, however, here's a great way to improve your speaker points that you never think about in debate. Admit when the other team is right. Admit when the other team has won an argument. Show the judge that you're not so arrogant, egotistical, and ignorant that you think you're winning everything. Admit that, yes, their uniqueness argument is correct. But, right, the yes, but concession. Strategically, you need to be thinking about concessions because in the last 2 rebuttals, you've got less time to talk about the arguments than you did earlier in the debate. Concessions are an opportunity for you to show the judge that you're smart. You're smart enough to recognize the other team has won something, but here's why it doesn't matter. Yes, they're winning, but here's why that doesn't matter. The second type of choice, closing doors. You need to close doors. A way you can win debates and sound better doing it is don't just extend an argument. Explain to the judge why extending this argument means these arguments no longer matter. Right? Remember on the earlier example of flowing, I showed you they answered number 2 and number 4, but not 1, 3, and 5. I'm going to extend across number 3, but I'm not just going to leave it there. I'm not going to force the judge to figure out why that matters. I'm going to close the door and explain why that permutation that I made that they weren't paying attention to means the counterclaim's no longer competitive, can't vote for it. Right? That simple statement, counterclaim no longer competitive, can't vote for it, is closing the door. It shows the judge that not only are you going to extend the argument, you're going to explain why that argument matters. Number 3, and this goes to a question Ty referenced earlier. This is important for those of you who are not very good at debate. It is always better to group than it is to drop. Debaters are taught to be line by line, and we would love for you to be line by line refutation. I would love it if, when you're extending an argument, you explicitly reference every point the other team said. But some of you aren't going to be able to accomplish that right now because you don't have enough experience. And you're not going to be able to accomplish that later down the road because either you're not very good or you just don't care enough and you're kind of lazy. I'm telling you right now, in a world where the choice is I don't answer it at all or I group it, it's better to group. So in the 1AR, raise your hand if you do the first affirmative rebuttal. Do you have any 1ARs? Here's a 1AR trick for you. Not really much of a trick. You got 30 seconds left and you've got a disad to answer. Don't start at the top. Instead, when you get to that disad, say group it all. Here's 5 things we're going to extend. Right? That's so much smarter than I'm going to try to go really fast and make it through. Tracy number 1, extend Tracy number 2. Okay, I'm not going to get to Tracy number 6. But if I group and say there wasn't a link to this argument, extend across the Tracy evidence from Smith that says extend number 3. Then grouping allows you to say something like no internal link or case outweighs that can then be spun by your 2AR as an answer to one of those itty bitty things that you didn't get an answer to. Right? Same thing in the 2AR. You're worried because the 1AR was really fast and blippy on your K that you're trying to extend, right? You're one of those teams, we got our one-off security K. Okay? We got our one-off with Connie and K of economics. And the 1AR had 12, it seemed like 12 new permutations. And I didn't catch all of them. And my partner has a bladder problem, so we don't really have much prep time because we had to use a bunch of it for the 1AR because they had to go to the bathroom for the third time. The judge only allowed 2 bathroom trips before they start counting the right. So what am I going to do in the 2AR? Group the permutations. They're either a severance because they don't extend the plan, or they're a non-intrinsic permutation, or they're not net beneficial. Right? Then it doesn't matter that I didn't answer each and every one of them because I've got 3 generic things to say about each of them. And as a judge, if you tell me to group the permutation, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to treat them all the same. Now, I am going to allow the 2AR to try to answer that stuff and explain why I know this one, the 2AR, why this particular permutation isn't intrinsic, isn't a severance, it isn't beneficial. But I'm at least going to force them to do that work. They're not going to be able to win by extend permutation, do the counterclaim. Because I'm going to think to myself, hold on, do the counterclaim, that severs the claim. That's a severance permutation. Right? So group is better than drop. B subpoint, evaluations. Got 3 points here. Number 1, what to compare. You probably are aware that you're comparing magnitude, time frame, probability. Right? Does any of that, does that sound familiar? Oh yes, magnitude, time frame, probability. Okay, here's the question I have for you. How do you make comparisons? Here's the choice, here's the option, the dilemma that you have been given. Okay? Arjun, you can choose one of these 2, but only one of these 2. Okay? Right now, I can slap you. I can come up here right now and slap your butt.
That's awesome.
Okay? Or a week from now, I can flip a coin. If it's heads, I'm going to shoot you. If it's tails, I'm going to give you $100.
I think, ooh.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I think the first one.
I
Someone got shot in the week last
I
night.
can
That's our dilemma, right? That's magnitude, time frame, probability, right there.
YOLO.
Yes.
What's YOLO?
You only live once.
That's the motto.
You never heard that?
YOLO.
The point being, magnitude, time frame, and probability need to be talked about. Right? It's not so obvious that magnitude obviously outweighs time frame and probability obviously outweighs. It depends on the context. Right? If the choice for Arjun is I'm going to slap you today or I'm going to slap you a week from now, you'd probably say I'll take a week from now and I'll figure out what to do. Time frame obviously is more important. If I say I'm going to slap you now or definitely shoot you in a week, you probably take the slap now. Right? In that instance, magnitude probably outweighs time frame. But in debates, it's rarely that clean cut. Okay? Which leads me to number 2. Even if your last rebuttal, whether it be the 2AR or the 2NR, should have multiple even if statements. Even if statements. Even if our opponent is correct about here's why we win. These are so important to judges. I can't tell you how many debates I judge where, according to the last 2 rebuttals, The affirmative won every argument, and the negative won every argument. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because that didn't happen. Instead, the affirmative won about 30% of what they were going for, and the negative won about 25% of what they were going for. And I don't know how to compare those because the affirmative story assumes they've won everything, and the negative story assumes they've won everything. What if you don't win everything? Even if, lets the judge know, even if we're not winning this, we still win. Because that scenario is much more likely that you won everything. Yes, Tom.
So, in the case, which I'm sure any point all of us are going through or have experiences,
Yeah.
what do you do in the sense, like, if you're judging novice debate as a varsity member, that a novi goes, we won, is everything, right?
Yeah.
How do you evaluate the round at that point?
Okay, let's break it out for a second and talk about judging for a second. In general, you should always keep in mind that when you're judging individuals who have very little experience in debate, it's not as critical to figure out who won that debate because they probably aren't going to remember that after lunch. Instead, it's a teaching opportunity to educate them. And so what you need to do at the end of the round is make a decision that you believe which side did the better debating, and then be able to explain to the team why that decision is something they should be shooting for in the future. Right? So a lot of times I say when I judge inexperienced debates, I vote aft because there was only one speech in the round that made any sense. It was the one that was prepared, the 1AC. Right? It wasn't that I thought the aft did a whole bunch better debating. Both teams were about to get a lot of lessons from me in the post round about what they could do better. I'm just going to let you know the speech that made the most sense was this speech. Or I thought the 2NC had a really good historical example. So that's what I'm going to tell you about right now. Novice debate does not explain. You know?
So it's more along the lines of like evaluation of who. Okay.
Here's the answer to it. To vote however you want, understanding that what you're going to talk about at the end of the debate is really the focus. It's not what happened in that debate, because that's going to get forgotten about. Instead, it's what can we take from this debate? In that instance, I would try to find something positive that each of the members did and focus on that in my post-round discussions. So, ooh, I really like when you did this, try doing more of that. And then one thing that they need, one area of improvement. Yes?
So if you're apt and you just failed on one of the off case, like they beat you bad.
Yeah, you dropped the dissent. 1AR just stone cold dropped the dissent.
Okay, so you just like don't even address it, just
Yeah. The 2AR should definitely address that.
okay.
The 2AR should be like, look, yep, we dropped the dissent. And what I'm gonna say might seem new to you, but here's why it's not. We did say in the 1AR the case outweighs. We dropped that dissent, but I'm gonna make here's three reasons why the case still outweighs that conceded disadvantage. Right?
Okay.
The
But
last
if it just
debate-
like obviously does like if they fucking killed you on the off case.
I'll give you an example. I can give you the last debate I was ever in. The last debate I was ever in as a college debater. The piece of evidence from Shell in '82 that says any risk of nuclear war is the same as infinity because nuclear war equals extinction. And any risk, any percentage, no matter how low times infinity is infinity. We dropped that. The block read that piece of evidence. The 1AR did not answer that piece of evidence. The 2AR sends it and says, we won this round, any risk in the dissent. The 2AR, we won this debate on a 2-1. My 2AR said, yep, you're right. We did drop that piece of evidence. Here's why they lose. They have lost on this uniqueness argument. We've won that even absent the plan, there is a uniqueness problem with the dissent. Something else is going to cause that dissent. Because they read the Shell evidence, you can't compare that the plan links more than the status quo. Because if the plan links 20% and the status quo links 5%, guess what? Their Shell piece of evidence says they're equal to each other. So the dissent is not a unique reason to vote against us. 5% risk in the status quo is the same as 100% risk of the dissent of the app. 5% times infinity is infinity, 100% of infinity is infinity. Therefore, not a reason to vote against the app. And we won that debate. Right? So that's an example where we don't go drop something and we figure out what to do. You know? So don't give up, is what I would say. Okay, let's see if we can get through these last few things here. Let's see. Real quick, this is very simple, very bite-sized information. What judges expect from speeches? Number one, the 1AC is a coherent story. Simply put, when I listen to a 1AC, I'm expected to hear a story about why the status quo is messed up and how it should be fixed. Number two, the 1C is either one coherent story, it's one off, or I'm expecting a diversity of offensive reasons why the affirmative should lose. A diversity being the important part of that second part. Number three, the 2AC is expected to reconstruct the case, introduce new offense, cover the 1C, and end on an open-ended argument. I'm expecting the 2AC to reconstruct the case, introduce new offense, cover the 1 and C, and end on an open-ended argument. Number 4, the neg block is the time when I'm expecting to get explanation and expansion. It's when choices are being made, and the 1 and R is always the best speech in the debate. I expect the 1 and R to be the best speech in the debate. They have a ton of prep time. The 1 and R should be beautiful. It should be crystal clear. After the 1 and R, I should be like, dang, that was a good speech. Right? Too many debate teams view the 1 and R as a throwaway speech. It should be awesome. It's your chance to kick butt. You've got all this prep time. You get the 1 and R should be the speech in the debate that does more tearing apart of the opponent's evidence than any other speech. You've got all that time to look through the 2AC evidence and figure out what they underline and what they didn't underline, look at their source. I should be hearing about source qualification. I should be hearing about underlying parts of cards. That's what the 1 and R should be about. Number 5, the 1AR uses the 2AC structure, and they highlight the most important parts of the affidavit. They make choices, they extend offense. Number 6, the last 2 rebuttals should be in the past tense. The last 2 rebuttals should be in the past tense. When I say debate like a judge, I think your 2NR and your 2AR should be thought of like this. Forget that you were debating. Imagine that you're on a panel with the judge, and your 2AR is not the second affirmative rebuttal. Instead, it is your RFG for why the affirmative won the round. That's how you should talk. The debate's over. Right? Every negative speech has been given. You should be able to talk in the past tense. The 2NR should do the same thing. The 2NR should be a judge explaining why the negative won that debate. Now, there's still an affirmative speech to happen, but that last rebuttal by the affirmative can't introduce new arguments. Choices have been made. Consequences must be rendered. Talk to the judge as if you were judging the debate. D subpoint. This is important if you aren't already doing this. Every one of you that have a computer have the ability to do this. You should be recording your speeches, your practice speeches as well. Here's a great way to get better. Record your speech, then go back and flow yourself. Find 2 to 3 things that you can get better at. Redo that speech. Record that speech and listen to it and decide, did I get better at it? The beauty of technology today is you don't need a coach. You can coach yourself. You can coach yourself. Record your speeches, flow your speeches, look for areas of improvement, redo those speeches, and listen to that recording. Am I getting better? If you're not getting better, it's either because A, you're incapable of it, find another activity, or B, you're just lazy. Because you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. If you're doing those 4 things, record a speech, flow it and listen for areas of improvement, redo it and listen to it again. If you're doing that, you should be getting better. Finally, E, most important way to get better at debate, other than debating. Judge debates. Judge debates. For real, people, all of you have this opportunity. I want to end on this. You have the opportunity. Ty mentioned judging novice debates. Raise your hand if you get to opportunities to judge novice debates. Okay? Raise your hand if that sucks. It does.
I like it.
It's bad. It's really bad. It's hard. You got people who don't know what they're doing. You feel like you've been there an hour and a half. It is so easy to do what some of you have done for the last 2 hours, which is not listen to the lecture, take notes, but instead do something else. It's easy to do that. I know. They're not paying attention. They're kind of half-assing it, right? It's very easy for you to be like, oh, I'm so smart. I don't really have to pay attention to them. I'm going to open this other browser. Try this instead. Try not opening any browsers. Try flowing everything they said, and then try making an intelligent decision. And you will find it very hard to do. You'll find it really, really hard to do because they didn't really debate. And you'll ask yourself, how am I supposed to make a decision when they both stink? That's the question that judges are asking when they judge you. If you'll judge debates more than anything other than debating yourself, judging debates will improve your skills as a debater because it teaches negative role modeling better than anything else. Negative role modeling is, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Judging debates forces you to make decisions in debates where it's extremely hard, and you then start to recognize what judges want to hear because you've been a judge. If you've been a judge, you know how difficult it is for a judge to make a decision. Judge debates. Put effort into it. Have integrity as a judge, and you'll discover very quickly, oh, this is what I do. The best debaters I've had have been individuals who took time off between high school and college debate, or they spent some time in college, took some time off, and came back. And during that time, they coached high school debate. They judged lots and lots of high school debates. And when they came back, they had improved dramatically because they now knew what it was like to have to judge a debate. And knowing what it's like to have to judge a debate reminds you of how difficult it is to make a decision and what debaters can do to make decisions better. Okay, those are all the notes I have. Any questions that you have? Cool.